Chapter 11:22. Meg's hand slid from the collar to the hem of the dress, carefully appreciating the material of the dress. At the same time, he was curious as to how MIA had managed to make such an exact replica of her maid costume. Yabemia's face was red as she let out a long moan. Meg was stunned for a moment. He looked at MIA, who was suddenly blushing, her chest rising and falling violently, and biting her lips. He didn't seem to have done anything, did he? Why did she look like she was about to die? When Meg's slender fingers slid across Mia's collar, it was as if he was caressing her collarbone. When he grabbed the hem of her dress, her perky bottom seemed to have been electrocuted. She allowed his warm hands to rub it, and a numbing sensation instantly spread throughout her body, almost making her unable to stand properly. "Boss, you're so naughty." Mia's face was as red as an apple due to the intense embarrassment. She looked at Meg with a hint of gentleness in her eyes. She said with some difficulty, This is my scale, ah?" Meg was stunned for a moment. He subconsciously squeezed it again and nodded. "No wonder it's so smooth." Mia couldn't help but moan again. Tears were already welling up in her eyes. "Oh, I'm sorry, Mia. This is the first time I've seen a dress made from dragon scales, so I was a little curious," Meg said apologetically as he retracted his hand awkwardly. He also realized that his actions were a little abrupt. It's okay." Yabemia shook her head and replied weakly. The numbing sensation in her bottom hadn't completely subsided. After Meg's hand moved away, she felt an inexplicable sense of disappointment. "What's wrong with me? No. I'm definitely not that kind of person. Mr. Meg just doesn't know," Mia thought to herself. She tried hard to get rid of the strange thoughts in her mind, but she couldn't help but recall that strange feeling. Elizabeth glanced at Yabemia, then looked at Meg. After a moment of hesitation, she slowly unclenched her fists. "I'll go prepare your clothes," Meg said, then turned around and went upstairs. The current situation seemed a bit awkward, so he should escape first. Father touched Big Sister Mia, causing Big Sister Mia to make strange noises. "Should I write this down?" In the corner, Amy took out a small notebook and had a thoughtful expression on her face. "Are you okay?" Elizabeth looked at Mia and asked softly. "Yeah, I'm fine." Mia nodded and forced a smile. "Boss doesn't know, so you can't blame him for this." Elizabeth replied non-committally. Meg went upstairs and asked the system to make a new maid outfit for Yabemia. He took the clothes and was about to go downstairs when Gina walked out of the room while yawning. When she saw Meg, she walked straight to him and gave him a big hug. She then greeted him with a smile. "Good morning, Mr. Meg." "Good morning, Gina." Meg pulled his face out of the deep cleavage and panted as he greeted her helplessly. It was too painful to go through this kind of face-cleansing type of mourning every day. This had already caused him to postpone the date of assigning Gina to the staff dormitory. So fragrant. "I'm going back to Lantiste today to bring back the shark's fin and shark's lips for you," Gina said to Meg. "You don't know how to fly. If you want to go back, you'll have to spend a lot of time on the road, right?" Meg looked at Gina. After purchasing the real-time translation system from the system, he could already have daily conversations with Gina. He would even teach her some common language when he was free. He still had 2 sets of shark's fin and shark's lips, which were enough to make 2 pots of Buddha jumps over the wall today. However, there were no more ingredients for Buddha jumps over the wall tomorrow. It was indeed necessary to start the supply chain of Lantiste. Gina smiled and said, "Miss Elizabeth agreed to go back with me today, but the high priest said that he would soon think of a way to transport the shark's fin and shark's lips." "All right then." Meg nodded. With the power of the Lantistians, it shouldn't be a problem to think of a way to transport them. Since he didn't need to use his brain, he didn't ask further. "Mr. Meg is still as handsome as yesterday," Gina said to herself as she covered her face with her hand as she looked at Meg's back view as he turned around and went downstairs. "Mia, these are the clothes I prepared for you previously. You can go upstairs and change first." Meg went downstairs and passed the clothes to Mia. "Oh, all right." Yabemia took the clothes and walked upstairs. She rubbed her face with the clothes when she went up the stairs. She smiled blissfully, and said, "So Mr. Meg had already prepared the clothes for me." Elizabeth's clothes. Meg looked at Elizabeth. He remembered that she transformed directly the last time. Could it be that she didn't wear any clothes, and used her scales to transform into clothes? Elizabeth took 2 steps back and distanced herself from Meg. She looked at Meg warily, and the surrounding temperature dropped by a few degrees. "Don't misunderstand. I'm just curious." Meg quickly put his hands behind his back to show his innocence. "I won't let anyone touch me," Elizabeth said proudly. "Sister Elizabeth, let's go dance," Amy said as she held the music box and tugged at Elizabeth's skirt gently. "That seems to be the case." Meg looked at Amy's hand, and turned around to go into the kitchen with a smile. "Elizabeth, what should we dance to?" Amy continued to ask. "Let's do the dance we did last time." Elizabeth looked at Amy's adorable face, but she couldn't bring herself to be angry at her, so she said helplessly, "Count me in." Mia, who had changed her clothes, quickly came downstairs and joined the dance team. Meg entered the kitchen and was speechless as he looked at Camilla, who was wielding the 10 knives so skillfully that they looked like they were glinting. Camilla's sharp fingernails inspired Meg, so he asked the system to customize 2 sets of finger knives for her. As the name suggested, they were 10 thin and long knives that were fixed to the fingers. They could be wielded as easily as fingernails, and they replaced Camilla's fingernails. Just as Meg expected, with these 10 finger knives, Camilla was like a tiger that had grown wings. She could easily cut the ingredients into the shapes she needed. Although she was slower than Phyllis, there was no one else in Amy's who could compare to her, including Meg. Swoosh swoosh swoosh. With a swipe of the finger knives, a winter bamboo shoot was cut into a pile of grain-sized particles and fell into a box. How can such a simple job stump me?" Camilla smiled proudly. She used her mind to control a handful of green beans, and then she cut them into grain-sized particles in the blink of an eye. She liked the sound of cutting and the feeling of cutting. It gave her an inexplicable sense of pleasure. This is probably the real-life version of cutting fruit, right? Meg raised his eyebrows. Chapter 11:23. "All right, let's eat first," Meg said with a smile as he took off his apron and watched as Mia placed the last dish on the table. "Don't I have to pay to eat all this?" Camilla asked hesitantly as she looked at the sumptuous dishes on the table. "Yes, this is one of the benefits of the restaurant's employees." Meg nodded. Speaking of which, the restaurant's employees' allowance was many times higher than their salary. "Then can I have another helping of tofu pudding?" Camilla's eyes lit up. Meg shook his head. "No, even the waiters can only have 1 helping of tofu pudding per meal. If you eat too much, you will be overnourished." "All right." Camilla sat down at the empty seat. It was rare that she didn't ask any questions. She picked up her chopsticks and ate quietly. After breakfast, Meg pushed the bicycle to send Amy to school. Camilla, who had finished her work for the morning, flew out of the back window and left the restaurant quietly. "Madam, are we really going to be played by a human just because of a photostone?" Caesar said in an alley as if he had been humiliated. "Even a little fat cat can scare you so much that you run away with your tail between your legs." "You are such an embarrassment to me," Camilla said disdainfully as she glanced at Caesar. "Madam, you can't blame me. That little fatty is definitely not an ordinary cat. Every time I face it, I have a fear that comes from the depths of my soul." "Shut up." Camilla interrupted Caesar. She clenched her fists, and said, "I will never give in so easily. Agreeing to stay at Amy's was just a delaying tactic. My goal is to gain his trust first, and then find a chance to steal the photostone. That way, I won't be controlled by him anymore." "Madam, you are indeed a good strategist." Caesar praised immediately. "All right, let's make a plan now." Tonight, Meg brought a breakfast of soy milk and youtiao with him as he sent Amy to the new magic lab. The new magic lab built by Crassus had been completed. It was 3 times the size of the previous magic classroom. It was located in the northwest corner of Chaos School. It was a standalone building with no other buildings around it. From the outside, it looked like a square black box. There was nothing special about it. However, those who had visited this place would know that this was the most advanced magic lab in Chaos City, or even the entire Norland continent. It contained all kinds of auxiliary equipment and training rooms that were required for all stages of magic. At the same time, it also had a pink amusement park. Yes, this was Amy's exclusive magic lab. Boss Mag, your youtiao is really delicious. I will have youtiao with savory soy milk for breakfast every morning from now on, Krasu said with a smile as he took the breakfast from Mag and chewed on the youtiao noisily. Master Crassus, the other children are going to have their holidays soon. When are you going to give me a holiday? Amy asked eagerly before Meg could say anything. Cough, cough. Crassus, who had just drunk a mouthful of soy milk, choked and coughed dryly. He looked at Amy in confusion. Holiday? What holiday? Do we need a holiday to learn magic? Master Crassus, it's like this. The students of Chaos School have a holiday every year during the coldest time of winter. At the same time, it's also to welcome the Peace Day holiday. During the hottest time of summer, they also have a 2-month holiday to avoid the heat. Meg explained with a smile. In his memory, only Chaos School implemented the holiday during winter and summer vacations. The students of Rodu didn't have it. Crassus frowned and said, the teachers of Chaos School really know how to enjoy life. They don't teach the children knowledge and abilities properly, and only think about living a comfortable life all day. They don't teach during the hot summer, and don't teach during the cold winter. They even make it sound so nice, and push all the responsibility to the students. This kind of bad practice can't be learned. That seems to make sense. Meg nodded thoughtfully. No, I want a holiday too. Amy put her hands on her hips and pouted. Why can other children have a holiday, but I can't? Amy wants a holiday too. Crassus persuaded earnestly, Little Amy, learning magic is something that requires long-term persistence. If we don't practice for a month or two from time to time, magic will be wasted. Then, we won't be able to become a powerful magic caster. You're building your foundation now. If you neglect magic, it will be a very bad thing. Meg looked at Amy. Although he knew that Amy wanted a holiday, this was, after all, a negotiation between the little one and the teacher. So, he chose to remain silent and let Amy make her own choice. Amy put down her hands and asked Crassus hesitantly, if I have a holiday, I won't be able to become a powerful magic caster. Crassus nodded and said, yes. For the next 3 months, I have already formulated an intensive curriculum schedule. If Amy can follow it, she might have a chance to successfully break through to the 7th tier and become a high-level magic caster. Amy glanced at Meg and then asked, if I become a high-level magic caster, will I be able to protect Father? Crassus nodded and said, if you become a high-level magic caster, it means that you will have become a powerhouse standing at a higher position in this world. Of course, you will be able to protect Mr. Mac. Then, I don't want a holiday. I want to continue learning magic, Amy said firmly. A smile appeared on Meg's face. He didn't expect the little one to give up a holiday to protect him. His heart instantly warmed, and he respected her choice. Good, good, good. Crassus said good 3 times in a row. His precious disciple had become a high-level magic caster after learning magic for half a year. She was definitely going to be a legend in the history of the Norland continent. Lord Crassus, Meg, then I'll go back first, Meg said, and turned to leave. Have you heard? Amy's released a soup called Buddha Jumps Over the Wall yesterday. It's priced at 10,000 copper coins, an old man said with a chuckle in a morning tea house. Is that boss crazy? 10,000 copper coins for a bowl? Would there be such an idiot who would buy it? Someone at the side quickly chimed in, and the other customers also looked over. You don't say. They released a total of 10 bowls yesterday, and they were all sold out in a short while. Seems like there are quite a lot of idiots in this world. Then you don't know the effects of Buddha Jumps Over the Wall. I heard that 2 knights broke through on the spot after eating it. The most amazing thing is that after drinking this Buddha Jumps Over the Wall, even balding hair grew out, the old man exclaimed. Wow. Chapter 1124. Mag was riding his bicycle slowly along the street where there weren't many pedestrians when a broom suddenly fell to the ground in front of him. He was so scared that he immediately slammed on the brakes. "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." An old man who was sitting on a bench at the side of the road stood up and picked up the broom that had fallen to the ground as he apologized to Mag with an apologetic expression. Meg glanced at the old man. He was about 60 years old. Half of his hair was white, but the wrinkles on his face were very deep. There was frost on his messy beard and eyebrows. He was wrapped in a tattered black jacket, and there was an armband on his left arm with the words Aiden Square Janitor written on it. He seemed to be a janitor. There was an old lady standing next to the bench. She was also in her 50s or 60s. She had a hunched back and a thin figure. She was holding half a biscuit in her hand and looking at him nervously. "It's okay," Meg said with a smile. The old man's politeness made him feel a little embarrassed. The roadblock had been cleared. Meg lifted his leg and was about to continue riding. "Hey, old man, you don't have to do that. I'm not hungry. You can eat some." "I won't eat." The old lady's voice sounded. Meg turned around in confusion. He saw the old man take out half a biscuit and pinch it as if he were pinching a rock. He said anxiously, "It's too cold. It's usually soft. Why can't it warm up today?" "It's okay. I'm not hungry." The old lady shook her head. She looked at the biscuit and swallowed hard. She then looked away. Then I'll get some water for you to soak it in. You can eat it when it's soft." The old man handed the biscuit to the old lady. He turned around and took out a bamboo cup from a basket filled with trash. He twisted it twice and opened the lid. His eyes reddened when he saw the thin layer of ice in the cup. "Okay, hurry up and eat. Then we'll get to work. It's so cold. The sooner we finish cleaning, the sooner we can go back." The old lady stuffed the biscuits in her hand into the old man's hand and took the bamboo tube from his hand. She closed the lid and put it back into the basket on her back. There was a smile on her wrinkled face. Meg hesitated for a moment before getting out of the car and parking it. He looked at the old man and said, "Sir, is there anything I can help you with?" The old man looked back at Meg and was stunned for a moment. He then looked around and asked uncertainly, "Are you talking to me?" Old Jack and his wife had been sweeping the Aiden Square for more than 10 years. Because they dealt with garbage all year round, people usually avoided them. This gentleman in front of him was handsome and dressed in extraordinary clothes, and he actually took the initiative to greet him. This was something that had never happened before. "Yes, I see that you seem to have encountered some difficulties. Do you need my help?" Meg nodded. "It's not difficult. We came to the square at 4 in the morning to start sweeping. We brought some dry food to eat, but because the weather is too cold, it's frozen stiff. Usually, I use my body temperature to soften it before giving it to her, but today it's too cold. I can't soften it no matter how hard I try. The hot water we brought has also frozen because it's been too long. I'm fine with it. I can swallow it with some effort, but my wife doesn't have many teeth left. She's cold and hungry. If she doesn't eat something to fill her stomach, I'm afraid her body won't be able to take it," old Jack said. His eyes turned red again, and his face was full of self-blame. "Ayo, why do you make me sound so useless? My body is fine. Let's not waste this gentleman's precious time." The old lady rolled her eyes at old Jack. She smiled at Meg and said, "Sir, you can go ahead with your work. We're fine." Meg looked at the old lady. Although her tattered clothes were mended, her smile was as clean as a flower blooming in the snow. It made people feel very comfortable. What a kind old lady. Meg sighed in his heart. Looking at the pancakes in their hands, he felt a little heartache. Ding. The host has taken pity on the two cleaners and triggered a new mission. The cleaners in the Aiden Square keep the Aiden Square clean and tidy. Every day, they start cleaning at 4 in the morning. They work for several hours in the -10 degrees Celsius temperature. They are tired and hungry, and they can't even eat a mouthful of piping hot food before they finish their work. The host has to promise to provide the cleaners in the Aiden Square with a piping hot porridge with pork and century egg for breakfast. Mission reward, a recipe for porridge with pork and century egg. Punishment for mission failure. Clean the Aden Square alone. Just then, the system's voice suddenly sounded in Meg's mind. Meg was stunned. He did take pity on them, but he only wanted to buy breakfast for the couple and provide them with some water. He didn't expect the system to ask him to provide breakfast for all the cleaners in the Aden Square. It wasn't a big problem. However, he felt a little uncomfortable being forced to be a good person. System, are you forcing me to do good deeds? As a gourmet system, isn't this a little out of line? Meg said in his heart, feeling a little displeased. Host, if you want to become a real god of cookery, you have to have a strong heart. Kindness and compassion are the most basic characters. This is a mission to develop your character, and it's not out of line, the system replied calmly. In that case, I'll reluctantly accept this mission. Meg said thoughtfully. He had provided food for the children once before, and sharing delicious food was indeed something that made people happy. Providing a piping hot breakfast for the hungry cleaners, and it was just porridge with pork and century egg, shouldn't be a burden to him. It's okay. I'm not busy now. Meg looked at the old lady with a smile. Give me the bamboo tube. I'll get some water for you. The old lady looked at Meg's kind smile, but she showed some hesitation. It's nothing. My restaurant is just in front. Meg pointed in the direction of Amy's. Then I'll have to trouble you, sir. The old man took out the bamboo tube, poured out all the water inside, and handed it to Meg. The cold bamboo tube still had ice shards in it. In this kind of weather, this kind of container that didn't keep warm at all could turn the hot water into cold water in less than 10 minutes. Meg took the bamboo tube and walked straight to a breakfast shop not far away. How can you trouble him? The old lady looked at old Jack with some resentment. Old Jack laughed dryly and looked at the old lady dotingly. I have to let you eat something. I'll thank that kind sir properly later. Chapter 11:25. Meg came back with a bamboo tube filled with boiling water and 2 portions of steamed cakes made from coarse grain flour. The steamed cakes were the softest food in the breakfast shop. He tried half a piece, and although it didn't melt in his mouth, it was still quite friendly for people who couldn't chew easily. Have something to eat first, and then drink some water. Meg handed the steamed cakes and boiled water to the old lady. No. We only need water. How can we take your breakfast? The old lady waved her hand repeatedly, and only took the bamboo tube. She smiled, and said, with the boiled water, I only need to soak the cakes in the water, and they will be ready to eat in a while. Thank you so much. Yes, thank you so much, sir. We only need boiled water, old Jack said with a smile. Old Jack said with a smile. He swiftly opened the lid and poured the boiling water into the lid of the bamboo tube. He then broke off a few pieces of biscuits and threw them into the water. The steaming hot water quickly melted the biscuits. Mag passed the steamed cake over to them again with a sincere expression, and said, I've already had my breakfast. If this steamed cake gets cold, I won't be able to eat it. I feel like it would be a pity to waste it like this, so please help me eat it. Old Jack and his wife looked at each other, and their faces revealed a bit of embarrassment. It would be a pity if such a good steamed cake was wasted, but they also felt a bit apologetic about accepting a gift from others for no reason. Meg continued to smile, and said, I bought breakfast for the 2 of you because I have something to ask of the 2 of you. If the 2 of you don't want to accept it, I would be too embarrassed to ask. Sir, what do you want us to help with? Just tell us. If we can help you, we will definitely not refuse, the old lady said with certainty. Then sit down and eat something first, and I will tell you. Meg stuffed the steamed cakes in his hand into the hands of the old lady and old Jack. The 2 of them saw that they couldn't refuse, and Meg really didn't intend to take it away, so they had no choice but to accept the steamed cakes. Meg looked at the 2 of them curiously, and asked, I want to know, how many cleaners are there in the Aden Square? A total of 32. I usually see so many during meetings. Old Jack thought for a while, and then looked at Meg strangely. Why are you asking this? The old lady also looked at Meg strangely. Why is this kind gentleman asking about the cleaners? Oh, it's like this. I am the boss of Mammis over there. I feel that you guys work hard every day to clean the Aden Square, so I would like to provide breakfast to warm your stomachs in this cold winter, Meg said with a smile. Old Jack and the old lady both looked at Meg in shock. Usually, the passers-by wouldn't even look them in the eye, and the restaurants treated them like scourges. They would be chased away if they tried to get close. That was also why they didn't dare to ask for a cup of hot water food. Mammy restaurant. Old Jack suddenly thought of something, and exclaimed softly. Isn't that the famous restaurant at the end with a long line every day? Oh, it's that restaurant, the old lady said in surprise. During the meetings these days, they often heard people mention that restaurant. They heard that it had taken first place on the Aden Square food ranking, and there were hundreds of customers lining up at the door every day. The food inside cost at least 200 copper coins, and the most expensive one cost 10,000 copper coins. Oh my God! They really didn't dare to imagine what the food that cost 10,000 copper coins looked like. Could it be made of gold? The two of them didn't even earn 10,000 copper coins a year. Yes, it should be the restaurant you were talking about. Meg nodded. He didn't expect Mammis to be more famous than he thought. You're saying that you're going to provide us with breakfast? Old Jack asked with some uncertainty. This kind of thing was too unbelievable. Yes, I don't know where I can go to see your person in charge. I want to talk to him directly. Meg nodded. The old lady quickly regained her composure. She pointed to a small alley not far away, and said, Our office is on the second floor of that alley. We have a meeting there every day at 9 o'clock. Mr. Sidka, who is in charge of us, will be there at that time. Meg looked in the direction the old lady was pointing at, and smiled. Okay, thank you. Please enjoy your meal. See you later. We should thank you, sir. This is the best breakfast we've ever had, the old lady said gratefully. Meg said goodbye to the two old ladies, and rode his bicycle back to the restaurant. It was best to talk to their person in charge about this kind of thing. In order to avoid some trouble, it was best to identify the name list and all the staff to prevent the phenomenon of impersonation. After all, Meg wasn't running a charity. He wanted to help those in need, not everyone. There was still a long line at the entrance of Mammis. Harold's family was at the front of the line. Harold looked in the direction of the restaurant's entrance with anticipation. As a person who never ate breakfast, he was completely captivated by the delicious soy milk and youtiao meal after he tried it for the first time at Mammis yesterday. Of course, the most important thing was that after eating that breakfast, his stomach didn't hurt at all. There were no symptoms of bloating or acid reflux. After playing with his wife and daughter for a whole day, he felt so refreshed. It was a wonderful feeling. So, without Doris saying anything, he got up early this morning and brought them to Mammis again to have breakfast together as a family. Father, can I have an ice cream? Kathy asked expectantly as she held Harold's hand. Harold shook his head and smiled. Not today. It's too cold in the morning. Can I bring Kathy here for ice cream when I'm on leave next time? Okay. Kathy was slightly disappointed, but she quickly smiled again. It's so blissful to be able to eat with Father every day. I feel very blissful too. Harold patted Kathy's head. The little girl had grown so tall in the blink of an eye. He had indeed missed out on too much companionship. He had to spend more time with them in the future. This is such a wonderful restaurant. Doris looked at the father and daughter with a blissful smile on her face. Mr. Meg, I have to leave. The princess needs me. Phyllis walked up to Meg as soon as he entered the restaurant. She said softly, Miss Camilla can take over my job now. Even if I leave, it won't affect the restaurant's business too much. Chapter 11:26. Meg looked at Phyllis's determined eyes, and pondered for a moment before nodding. All right, you've already learned how to make Yeongju fried rice and braised chicken and rice. You'll be able to make delicious food with just a few changes. It's time for you to go. Thank you, Mr. Meg. Phyllis bowed deeply to Meg before straightening her body. She blushed slightly, and said, If I come back after the war, will you still want me? Of course. How could I not want an outstanding employee like you? Meg nodded matter-of-factly. But why does this sound like a bad flag? Only an outstanding employee. Phyllis was slightly disappointed, but she quickly smiled and nodded. Then I'll definitely come back. Meg continued, I've already asked around about Princess Irina's current location. I'm very impressed by her noble character of fighting for the freedom of ordinary elves. The situation of the night elves shouldn't be too good now, so I'm donating some food in my name. You can go with the food escort team so that you can take care of each other on the way. Food? Phyllis was stunned for a moment, but she quickly understood that the princess was no longer the princess who was loved and worshipped by all elves. The conditions of the night elves must be very difficult, but she didn't think of this at all. Mr. Meg was indeed very thoughtful. Meg nodded and said, Yes, Phyllis. Take a rest first. When the morning service is over, I'll bring you to a place. There are some things that I need to discuss personally. Okay. Phyllis nodded hurriedly. She didn't even know where the princess and the others were now. She didn't expect Mr. Meg to do so much for her silently and arrange everything for her. Phyllis, are you leaving us too? Yarbemia stepped forward and held Phyllis's hand reluctantly. First it was Aisha, then it was Shirley, and now even you are leaving. I really can't bear to part with you. Yeah, are you elves all so busy? Barbara also looked at Phyllis with a perplexed expression. There had never been any wars in the Moon Nation, and all of the residents lived in harmony. Even quarrels and fights were rare. Everyone gathered around Phyllis. Although Phyllis didn't talk much, she had built a good friendship with everyone. They were reluctant to part with her now. I'm going to cook for Her Highness. I'll come back after the war ends. I think Miss Aisha and Miss Shirley will come back too. Phyllis looked at everyone with reddened eyes. Her eyes were also filled with reluctance. Here, she gained friendship for the first time, and received concern other than the princess. What a warm place. If she could, she would like to stay here forever. Let's get ready for business. Meg glanced at his watch and walked towards the kitchen. Meg took off his apron and hung it on the rack. He asked Phyllis to wait for him while he went upstairs to change his clothes. Let's go, Meg said to Phyllis as he came downstairs. Phyllis nodded and followed Meg to the door. Wait. At this moment, Anna's voice sounded from behind. Phyllis turned around. Anna jogged to Phyllis and handed her a little rabbit knitted with white wool. She said softly, Big Sister Phyllis, if you meet Big Sister Shirley, please pass this little rabbit to her for me. Tell her that I'll be waiting for her to come back. Phyllis looked at the plump little rabbit and nodded. All right, I'll give it to her if I meet her. Thank you. Anna's tears were already welling up in her eyes. She threw herself into Phyllis's arms and choked with sobs. You must come back. Millimeter. Phyllis's eyes also reddened, and she hugged Anna tightly. Phyllis, if you can't hold on any longer, write to me, and I'll bring the Moon Nation's army to help you. Barbara raised her hand and tried her best to make her expression look as nonchalant as possible. Count me in. Elizabeth raised her hand. I'm useless, but if you need me, I'll definitely come. Yarbemia also raised her hand. Thank you. Phyllis stood up and looked at everyone with a radiant smile. She waved her hand and said, Goodbye, everyone. Meg looked at everyone, and his heart was suddenly filled with warmth. He didn't know when it started, but everyone in the restaurant made him feel like he was part of a big family. They got along well, but they didn't lose their warmth. This was a friendship that he didn't have in his previous life. It had nothing to do with money or status. It was pure and beautiful, and it touched the softest part of his heart. If that day comes, I'll come too. I'll definitely come, Meg said in his heart. Regardless of whether it was Irina, Sally, Shirley, or Phyllis, he couldn't just stand by and watch. Meg pushed the bicycle out with Phyllis. They left the Aden Square and came to the north of the city. They turned into an alley, and after a few turns, they stopped in front of an old courtyard. Give me a moment, Phyllis. Meg walked towards the courtyard and knocked on the door. 3 long knocks and 2 short knocks. After a while, the door opened a crack, and an eye looked out. When it saw Meg, its eyes lit up, and it pulled the door open. Mr. Mac, you're here. Mond looked at Meg respectfully, and then shouted into the courtyard, "Boss, Mr. Mac is here. Let's talk inside." Meg turned around and waved at Phyllis, and then walked into the courtyard. "Are they the guests?" Phyllis looked at Mond in surprise, and then quickly followed Meg. "Mr. Mac, you're here." As soon as Meg entered the courtyard, Sargeras, who was topless, came out to welcome him with a smile. When he saw Phyllis, he immediately turned around and ran back to his room. After a while, he put on his clothes and came out. He touched his bald head embarrassedly, and said, "I thought you came alone." Meg smiled, and said, "Director Sargeras, we can start the mission that I talked to you about previously. Have you prepared the things that I need?" "Mr. Mac, the food that you asked me to buy is all ready. It's all loaded in the trucks and parked in the backyard. We can set off at any time after we harness the unicorns." Sargeras brought Meg to the backyard, where more than 20 trucks filled with food were parked. Meg nodded. These foods should be enough to get the night elves through this winter. He looked at Sargeras, and said, "Besides these food, Phyllis will also go with us. I hope Director Sargeras can take care of her on the way." Sargeras patted his chest, and said, "Don't worry, leave it to me. As long as I'm alive, I won't let any harm come to Miss Phyllis. It's a long journey, and we might be attacked by the elves." The reward, Sargeras interrupted Meg with a smile, but his tone was very firm, and he said, "Mr. Mac, 1,000 holy Ruggiamos are already a very generous reward. Besides, you've also prepared Ruggiamos for us. Don't worry, we will escort the food and Miss Phyllis safely." Chapter 11:27. "Thank you, Burning Legion," Meg said gratefully as he looked at Sargeras. Since Phyllis proposed to look for Irina, he had been preparing for something. Because he hadn't recovered his strength yet, he couldn't provide much support, so he could only provide some help in other aspects, such as preparing food and hiring the Burning Legion to escort them. Based on his understanding of Irina's character, she probably hadn't considered the issue of food before the uprising. Now that the Wind Forest was besieging them, it must be very difficult to obtain food. "I didn't expect Mr. Meg to prepare so much for me. I'm so touched." Looking at the trucks in the yard, Phyllis was touched. Her eyes turned red again as she looked at Meg. After talking with Sargeras, Meg turned to Phyllis and took out a small book wrapped in craft paper. He handed it to her. "What's this?" Phyllis took the book, her heart pounding. "Does Mr. Meg have something to say to me? If so, Phyllis, I'll do it." Phyllis almost blurted out. She suddenly realized that she seemed to have snatched the book, and her face turned red. "You'll do it?" Mag raised an eyebrow. He didn't know what Phyrus was talking about, and why she was blushing all of a sudden. He continued, "Phyrus, this is a book on the art of war that I came across by chance. I think it's very well written. You can give it to your princess, perhaps it'll be of some help to her." Give it to Her Highness." Phyllis was stunned. So this wasn't a gift from Mr. Meg, and Phyllis was a little disappointed. Her face turned even redder. She nodded, and said, "Oh, okay, I'll give it to Her Highness. War is very dangerous. Be careful after this farewell. This knife is my gift to you. There will always be a place for you in the restaurant. Come back when the war is over." Meg took out a Chinese cleaver from the satchel at his waist and handed it to Phyllis. "Boss, this is your own kitchen knife," Phyllis said in surprise as she took the kitchen knife with both hands. She was familiar with the texture and weight of the knife. Meg smiled. "Now it belongs to you." "Thank you, boss." Phyllis smiled. "Well then, goodbye," Meg said to Phyllis with a smile as he looked at the members of the Burning Legion who had harnessed their unicorns and were looking at them. "Goodbye, boss." Phyllis waved at Meg, then turned around and ran towards the train. Meg stood at the entrance and watched the long line of cars slowly drive away. He stood in the empty alley for a while before he turned around and rode off on his bicycle. In this war where there was a great disparity in strength, perhaps only Taizu's practical results could be used as a theoretical support. He had to hurry up and improve his strength. Otherwise, no matter how many backup plans he had prepared, he would still be lacking a little. When Meg rode his bicycle to the Aiden Square cleaning department, They were about to leave after the morning meeting. Mag knocked on the door, and the 30-odd middle-aged cleaners and the young man standing at the front of the room all turned to look at him. "Sorry to disturb you. I am the boss of Mammoth, Meg. I have something to discuss with everyone. May I come in?" Meg asked with a smile. "Oh, it's that kind, sir." The old lady's eyes lit up, and she poked old Jack, who was dozing off beside her. "Mr. Meg." Old Jack opened his eyes in a daze, and his eyes lit up when he saw Meg standing at the door. He smiled and waved at him. Then, he turned to the young man sitting in front, and said, "Mr. Sidka, this is the kind sir I told you about just now." "Old Jack, is he the kind sir who bought breakfast for you this morning? You just said that he was going to prepare a hot breakfast for us. Is it really Mammoth? I heard that restaurant is super expensive." The cleaners began to whisper among themselves upon hearing that. They looked at Mag curiously. This was the first time something like this had happened. If they could have a hot breakfast every morning, that would be too blissful. Sidka stood up when he heard that. His square face was full of smiles. He looked at Meg and said, "Mr. Meg, please come in. Old Jack mentioned you to me just now. I didn't expect you to really come." Mammoth had been in the limelight recently. Of course, he had heard about it. The cleaning department was under the management of the City Lord's mansion. Although he was in charge of the Aden Square area and had 30-odd cleaners under him, he was just an ordinary employee. The cleaners were generally recruited for the old people who couldn't do heavy labor and had no children to support them. Their work efficiency was extremely low, and their salary was only enough to keep them fed. However, this was already a huge financial expense for the City Lord's mansion. There was no way to continue improving the living conditions of these old people. Therefore, although he knew that these old people didn't have it easy, especially on winter mornings, they had to work in the cold while eating cold food. Every winter, a few old people would pass away. With an ordinary salary and a family to support, he couldn't do anything. Therefore, when he heard that someone was going to provide breakfast for these cleaners this morning, he was pleasantly surprised. When he heard that this person was the owner of Mammoth, he was even more shocked. Recently, there were too many rumors about Mammoth in the City Lord's mansion. The waitresses there were all first-class beauties. The City Lord was a frequent customer of that restaurant. The important meeting between the three clans was held there. It was said that a prisoner escaped from Bastille prison yesterday. In the end, he didn't run after escaping, but turned around and entered Mammoth. Any one of these rumors was shocking, not to mention that they all came from the same restaurant. "Hello, Mr. Sidka. Hello, everyone." Meg walked in with a smile. It seemed like the two old people had already helped him with the promotion. "It's like this. I saw that everyone has to start cleaning so early in the morning, and the weather has been so cold recently. Therefore, I want to provide breakfast for everyone. It may not be sumptuous, but I hope it can give everyone some warmth." Meg went straight to the point. "That's great. This is really a good thing. Yes, Mr. Meg is really a good person. We don't have to eat breakfast that is like ice cubes anymore." As soon as Meg finished speaking, there was a round of enthusiastic applause below. "Mr. Meg, I thank you on behalf of the Aden Square cleaners." Sidka shook Meg's hand with a face full of gratitude. Book Guest House Reading Website. Chapter 1128. Ding. Congratulations to the host for completing the mission of delivering a warm winter breakfast to the cleaners. You have received a reward, a recipe for kanji with pork and century egg. On the road to becoming the god of cookery, your temperament has been improved and sharpened. At the same time, you have received a good person card. Collecting 5 good person cards will give you a chance to make a wish, the system's voice sounded. A chance to make a wish? What's that? Meg was slightly stunned and asked curiously. A chance to make a wish. The host can make a wish to the system, and the system will try its best to fulfill it. Then how do I get the good person card? Meg continued to ask. This chance to make a wish sounded very good. As long as the host does good deeds, there is a certain chance to get the good person card. That's really a good person card. Meg curled his lips. It didn't sound very reliable. God knows how many good deeds he had to do to get 5 good person cards. Looking at the shiny recipe for the kanji with pork and century egg that appeared in his mind, this was probably the easiest task he had ever done. However, the task had already begun, and the responsibility had just begun. Providing the cleaners with a steaming hot breakfast every day was something that needed to be persisted for a long time. Everyone is too polite. From tomorrow morning onwards, please come to Mammoth's entrance at 6:30 a.m. I will provide a free breakfast for everyone, Meg said to everyone with a smile. Everyone praised Meg again. Mr. Sidka, can you give me a list of everyone's names, and then let me get to know everyone? In order to prevent other people from sneaking in and causing people to not be able to eat breakfast, I want to do a simple introduction, Meg said to Sidka while looking at him. Of course, Mr. Meg is indeed very thoughtful. Sidka nodded and walked quickly to his desk. He pulled out a list from a pile of messy papers and handed it to Meg. At the same time, he began to introduce the names to Meg one by one. Okay, thank you. Meg kept the list. He had already memorized everyone's names. This way, he didn't have to worry about other people sneaking in for the free breakfast. Then, I will take my leave first. Meg nodded slightly to old Jack and his wife, and then left. He had to go back and prepare some things. This Meg is really a good person. Yeah, I heard that the cheapest food in that restaurant costs at least 200 copper coins. I have never eaten such expensive food before. After Meg left, the cleaners were still discussing with expectant smiles on their faces. All right, everyone is dismissed. Go back and rest, Sidka said. Everyone dispersed. Meg returned to the restaurant. Yarbemia and the others had most likely gone to the ice cream shop, leaving Anna crouched in front of the floor-to-ceiling window with Ugly Duckling in her arms as she looked outside in a daze. Meg stood to the side and watched for a while. Then he slowly walked over and squatted down beside Anna. He whispered, Anna, what are you thinking about? I'm wondering if Shirley and big sister Aisha will meet on the battlefield. Anna turned to look at Meg with a worried expression. If they meet, will one of them die? They won't. Meg shook his head with a smile. No matter if it's Aisha or Shirley, they won't hurt each other, even if they really stand on opposite sides. After all, they have fought side by side. Anna thought for a while, and a smile appeared on her face. She nodded, and said, Millimeterham, they are both very kind elves, and also real elves. All right, let's not sit here and daydream. I'll teach you how to make Yeongju fried rice today, okay? Meg said with a smile as he placed his big hand on Anna's head gently. Really? Anna's eyes lit up. She had been practicing her knife skills these days, and she had never cooked before. Of course. Anna's knife skills are already very good. She can cut the ingredients into the required size for fried rice. It's time to start learning how to cook. Meg nodded, and then he mentally purchased a set of cooking utensils suitable for Anna from the system. The wok provided by the system was half the size of a normal wok. It looked a little mini, but it was still a big wok for Anna. The spatula was also a size smaller. Even Anna's small hands could easily hold it, and she didn't need to use much effort. Anna moved a small stool over and stood on it, just enough to reach the height of the stove. She looked at Meg expectantly. She had to watch Uncle Meg make hundreds of plates of Yeongju fried rice every day. Every step and detail was deeply imprinted in her heart, but she didn't have the chance to practice. Now, she could finally try to make a plate of Yeongju fried rice that belonged to her. Yeongju fried rice is a very complicated dish. There are very strict requirements regarding the control of the fire and the timing of adding the ingredients. Let's start with the ingredients. Meg took out 2 sets of ingredients from the fridge, gave one to Anna, and held the other for himself. He started to teach her attentively. Anna stared at Meg without blinking. Although she had seen the same steps thousands of times, she still didn't want to miss any details. She remembered every word that Meg said in her heart. A plate of Yeongju fried rice that looked, smelled, and tasted good was soon out of the wok. Okay, Anna, you can start cooking for the first time. Meg put the plate of Yeongju fried rice aside and said with a smile. Okay. Anna nodded. She glanced at Meg, then withdrew her gaze. She stood in front of the chopping table for a while with her eyes closed. Then she opened her eyes again and picked up the Chinese kitchen knife. Her small hands held the broad Chinese kitchen knife, but it didn't feel cumbersome at all. The knife fell on the chopping board, making a rhythmic sound. The ingredients were reduced to the size of rice grains one by one under the knife, then Anna put them on a plate for later use. She turned on the fire, poured the oil, and put the ingredients into the wok with the right temperature. She stir-fried and tossed the wok. Everything was done smoothly. It was obviously Anna's first time cooking, but her performance amazed Meg. It didn't seem like something a 6 or 7-year-old child could do. This child is really talented. Meg couldn't help but praise her in his heart. She would definitely become a better chef than him in the future. Anna turned off the fire and took the first plate of Yeongju fried rice out of the wok. She carefully brought it over and put it next to Meg's plate. She looked at Meg expectantly and said, "Uncle Meg, try it." A plate of Yeongju fried rice that is burnt. When the 2 plates of Yeongju fried rice were put together, the difference in appearance became very obvious. In Anna's plate, the winter bamboo shoots and tree mushrooms were burnt yellow. The eggs weren't perfectly wrapped around the rice, and many of them were damaged. The oil was too shiny. The amount of oil used was a bit too much. "Okay, I'll try it." Meg picked up the spoon and put a spoonful of Yeongju fried rice into his mouth. The salty taste almost made him spit it out. The salt wasn't evenly fried, so the burnt taste was very obvious. Chapter 11:29. This was a Yeongju fried rice that was full of flaws. However, this was also the first time that Anna had cooked Yeongju fried rice with a spoon. Meg swallowed the fried rice and gave her a thumbs up with a smile. Overall, it's not bad. However, there's still a lot of room for improvement in the control of the fire, the technique, and the use of salt. However, it's already very impressive for Anna to be able to do this for the first time. It seems that there are still many flaws. However, I'll continue to work hard. Anna nodded with a happy smile on her face. "Anna, wait for me here for a while. We'll go to the market later and buy some ingredients for you to practice." Meg reached out and touched Anna's head. Then, he turned around and went upstairs. Tapping on the glittering recipe in his mind, a stream of information flowed directly into his mind. Kanji with pork and century egg. It wasn't a complicated kanji, but it was delicious enough. Cooking the kanji itself wasn't a complicated job. However, making the delicious century egg was the most difficult process in this dish. Century egg was also known as century egg. It could be considered as a kind of dark Eastern cuisine. Meg had an average impression of century egg. He didn't like it very much, but he didn't hate it either. If he could come across a plate of salad with century egg that tasted good, he would still eat a few pieces. According to the usual method, it would take about 30 days to make century egg. After the system's upgrade process and the modification of the cooking utensils, the curing time of century egg was shortened from 30 days to 3 days. However, in this way, even if Meg learned how to make kanji with pork and century egg tonight, he still wouldn't be able to present a bowl of piping hot kanji with pork and century egg to the cleaners tomorrow morning due to the lack of ingredients. "System, are you digging a hole for me? Can kanji with pork and century egg without century egg still be called kanji with pork and century egg?" Meg rolled his eyes and said, "Host, please don't worry. As long as the host can learn how to cook kanji with pork and century egg, the system has already prepared the century egg you need for 3 days. It won't affect the sales," the system replied. "What kind of egg are you using? How much is a century egg?" Meg continued to ask. The system uses the duck eggs of the Kashmir duck from the Morning Light Lake in the northwest of the Twilight Forest. The Kashmir duck is a level 3 magical beast. It feeds on fish and its eggs are rich in nutrients. It tastes sweet and cool and has the effect of nourishing yin and clearing the lungs. It lays only 1 egg per month and the quantity is extremely small. The century eggs made by this system are made from the yellow soil of Vic Mountain and the ashes from the rice that was irrigated by the water of life. "Alright, just tell me the price." Meg rolled his eyes. The price of a century egg as an ingredient is 200 copper coins. A century egg can be used to cook 4 bowls of congee with pork and century egg, the system replied. Meg thought for a while and asked, System, if I use ordinary duck eggs and materials that are relatively easy to obtain to make century eggs, what's the cost of 1 century egg? Host, as a candidate for the god of cookery, it's the most basic character to use the most perfect ingredients to cook delicious food for the customers. In the case where there are excellent ingredients to choose from, how can you use ordinary ingredients to make up the numbers? This is not in line with the identity and taste of the god of cookery. First of all, I'm an owner who needs to consider the profits of the restaurant. While doing good deeds, I have to control the investment cost and prevent the restaurant from being exposed to risks because of my personal feelings and actions. This is a sign of having a brain and has nothing to do with identity and taste, Meg calmly interrupted the system. However, using ordinary ingredients can't perfectly display the deliciousness of this dish. It's not in line with the host's ability as a candidate for the god of cookery. It's not conducive to building the reputation of the god of cookery, the system insisted. I'll use ordinary ingredients and the most sincere cooking skills to serve a bowl of congee with pork and century egg to these hardworking cleaners. The purpose is not to start a journey of gourmet food for them, but to let them work continuously in the cold for a few hours so that they can have a bowl of piping hot and delicious congee. This will make it easier for them to get through this cold winter. System, you're neglecting the essentials and focusing on the details. You haven't grasped the real point. Mag pursed his lips mockingly, and then directly said, Prepare 33 servings of ordinary century eggs for me. The market price of an ordinary duck egg is 2 copper coins each. I'll charge you 5 copper coins for the processing fee, and I'll give you 3 copper coins for the consumption. 1 ordinary century egg will be 10 copper coins. Host, it's settled then. Meg calmly interrupted the system and continued, For the congee with pork and century egg sold in the restaurant, I'll get the best century egg from you. You'll be responsible for the supply of ordinary century eggs in the future. The order is stable, the price is fair, and the profit margin is more than 5 times. This kind of business, if you miss this village, there won't be such a shop again, Meg said with a smile. I'll do it. The system almost blurted out. The corners of Meg's mouth curled up slightly. After confirming the ingredients in his mind, he turned around and went downstairs with a basket of vegetables. He brought Anna out to buy ingredients. Learning to cook required a large amount of ingredients. The cost of ingredients in the fridge was too high, so Meg planned to let Anna practice with ordinary ingredients first, just like Phyllis did previously. What he wanted to buy were the ingredients needed to make breakfast for the cleaners tomorrow morning. Reducing the cost of doing good deeds was the way to go in the long run. Meg's money didn't fall from the sky. He still had his own standards for doing things at different stages. 100 duck eggs, 2 bags of good quality pearl rice, a piece of lean meat, and various ingredients needed to make century eggs. When they came out of the market, Meg's basket was already filled with various ingredients. Send the rice to Amy's in half an hour, Meg said to the rice shop owner who was loading the cart. He carried the basket and took Anna to a building material store not far from the market. After buying some yellow soil and plant ash, they returned to the restaurant. Uncle Meg, are you planting flowers? Anna asked curiously as she looked at Meg, who put down the yellow soil and plant ash and other things. No, I'm planning to make a dish called century eggs. Meg shook his head and put the things behind the cabinet. He had to wait until he entered the test field for the god of cookery tonight before he could start making century eggs. Century eggs? Anna thought for a while. She had never heard of this dish. However, she had never heard of any of the dishes that Uncle Meg made, but they always brought her surprises. Anna, if you want to continue practicing, you can use these ingredients first. When you can make Yeongju fried rice to my satisfaction, you can use the ingredients in the fridge. Meg took out the ingredients that belonged to Anna and put them on the cutting table with a smile. Chapter 11:30. Morton Manor, in a quaint study room. Cyril stood and looked at Geoffrey, who was bent over a report. He said carefully, "Father, The matter of letting Gloria become a director of the Chamber of Commerce has caused a lot of dissatisfaction and discussion among the directors. Do you think we should give an explanation to the directors and remove Gloria from her position to appease the directors? Dissatisfaction? Geoffrey raised his head and looked at Cyril with some mockery. Since when do I need to look at other people's faces when making decisions? Besides, who else would be dissatisfied with this matter other than you? Cyril's lips trembled and he slowly clenched his fist. He steeled his heart and looked at Geoffrey. President, Gloria is only a woman after all. You only have one son left. If you continue to support Gloria and make me a joke, who will inherit family Morton and the Aden Chamber of Commerce in the future? Are you really willing to hand over the family to a woman who will be married off in the future? You. Geoffrey slammed the report in his hand on the table. He looked at the fearless Cyril who was staring straight at him. This unfilial thing actually dared to speak to him like this. Blood rushed to his head and he suddenly felt dizzy. Cyril was initially still a little fearful, but upon seeing Geoffrey's reaction, he was no longer fearful. A cold smile appeared on his face as he said, "Father, there's no way that Big Brother is going to inherit the family fortune. Family Morton is such a big family property. If you don't want to see it fall into someone else's hands, then you should train me well. Only I can make family Morton prosper. Get out. Get out." Geoffrey picked up the report on the table and threw it at Cyril. Cyril dodged to the side and looked at Cyril who was lying on the chair with his eyes closed. He bent down to pick up the report and put it back on the table. He smiled and said, "Since father is not feeling well, then I will take my leave. The Chamber of Commerce's year-end banquet is in a few days. I will propose to the board of directors that Gloria be kicked out of the board on that day." After that, Cyril didn't wait for Geoffrey to get angry and quickly walked out of the door. Geoffrey fumbled for a small bottle from the drawer and opened the cap with trembling hands. He raised his head and took a big gulp. After a while, he let out a long sigh. His flushed face gradually receded and he opened his eyes. His usually wise and dignified eyes were now filled with a trace of loneliness. Was I really in the wrong all those years ago? Geoffrey looked out the window in a daze. In order to make Lance inherit the family business, he had forced him to do many things. In the end, Lance gave up his right to inherit the family business and became a teacher at Chaos School. During all these years, in order to ensure that family Morton could continue to prosper, he had always been nurturing Cyril. He had placed a lot of hope on him and viewed him as his only successor. With this identity, he naturally had nothing to fear. He ate, drank, and played, and didn't pay any attention to the management of the company. Do I really have no choice but to hand over the family business to this kid? Geoffrey's brows furrowed as his heart wavered slightly. A figure then appeared in his mind. Gloria. Geoffrey murmured to himself as he tapped his knuckles on the table. This little girl's recent performance had indeed surprised him. She had been able to turn the Suede Textiles shop, which had been incurring losses for several years, into a profit so quickly. This was something that he didn't expect. Prior to today, he had never seriously considered handing over the family Morton to Gloria. "Heh, I'm still alive, and you dare to provoke me." Geoffrey's expression became serious again as he chuckled coldly. "If that old geezer Ian can hand over the Buffett family to that little girl, Hill, then do you think I won't hand over the Morton family to Gloria? Instead of handing it over to that wastrel to wreak havoc in the family, why not hand it over to Gloria, who's more capable? That little girl is very meticulous and has good aptitude. With some nurturing, she won't be inferior to Lance." "Menard," Geoffrey yelled toward the door. Menard pushed open the door and walked in. "Go get Mars," Geoffrey instructed. "Yes," Menard replied in a respectful manner before quickly departing. "Mr. Cyril, did the conversation with the old man go well?" A middle-aged man stood in the pavilion of the Morton Manor and smiled as he looked at Cyril, who was walking briskly toward him. Just as family head Bowen expected. Although the old man was very angry, he only told me to get lost. It seems that he really didn't want to hand over the Morton family and the Aden Chamber of Commerce to Gloria. Cyril chuckled in a carefree manner. He had been living under Geoffrey's thumb for so many years, and he was finally able to hold his head high for once. Family head Jeffrey has mocked old man Ian's decision to hand the Buffett family over to Mr. Hill more than once. How could he hand over the family business to a daughter, especially a granddaughter of a generation? The position of the head of family Morton will definitely be yours, Mr. Cyril, Bowen said with a smile, as if he had expected this. Cyril's face was full of joy as he looked at Bowen and said, "Family head Bowen, you promised to help me fight for the position of the head of the family. The first step is to remove Gloria from her position at the year-end banquet. Will there be any problems with this? Don't worry. The Marquis family and the Dodges family still have some influence in the Chamber of Commerce. Everyone knows that you will be the head of family Morton sooner or later. How could the directors not agree to your request? When the time comes, as long as half of the directors vote to remove Gloria, even the chairman won't be able to stop it." Bowen stroked his beard as he looked at Cyril and said, "However, after this is done, what Mr. Cyril promised, don't worry, family head Bowen. As long as I can inherit family Morton's business and become the head of the family, I will definitely help you become the chairman of the Chamber of Commerce in the next election," Cyril said with a nod. "Very good. Mr. Cyril is indeed a smart person. Then I will make a trip to the Dodges family now." Bo's smile became even brighter as he bid farewell and left. "Father, why should we help Cyril? He is the most dishonest person. His words can't be trusted." In the luxurious carriage, a young man looked at Bowen with a puzzled expression. "Cyril is just an idiot who can't be helped. As long as he becomes the head of family Morton, this fat piece of meat will be eaten up by us sooner or later. Since that's the case, why don't we help him?" Bowen sneered. "One she is enough. If there's another Gloria, then our Marquis family really won't be able to make a name for themselves." Chapter 1131. Mr. Meg. When it was close to noon, there was a knock on the door and Gina's voice. Meg opened the door, and Gina and Elizabeth came in empty-handed. "Gina, didn't you go to get the shark's fin?" Meg looked outside the door. There were no shark's fin outside, either. "Mr. Meg, you are really Alex's benefactor." Gina pounced on Meg excitedly, and wrapped her legs around him naturally like an octopus. "Huh!" Meg looked at Gina, who was hugging him tightly with an agitated expression, and was a little confused. The nether sharks that invaded Lanteast were all killed by the warriors of Lanteast, with the help of the divine weapon you gave them. The rest of them have been locked up in the fishery according to your request and have entered captivity mode. The invasion of the nether sharks this time did not cause any casualties among the merfolk, and none of the cities were seriously damaged because of the nether sharks. All of this is because of you. Gina looked up at Meg as if she was looking at a god that she worshipped. "Is that so? That's great." Meg's eyes lit up when he heard that. It was a good thing that the merfolk of Lanteast could not be harmed by the nether sharks, and the successful establishment of the deep-sea fishery also indicated the successful establishment of the nether shark's fin and shark's lip supply chain. How did he do it? How did he manage to subdue such a powerful magical beast so easily and solve a problem that a powerful tribe could not solve for thousands of years? Elizabeth looked at Meg curiously as if she was meeting him for the first time. She originally thought that he was just an ordinary human chef who came to work at Amy's only because of Mia's invitation. But now, she felt that Meg did not seem like an ordinary person. Whether it was his usual calmness when facing all kinds of powerful guests, or the negotiation with the high priest of Lanteast on the surface of the sea, it all showed that he was different from the rest. There seemed to be many special abilities hidden in this man that kept surprising and making people curious. "But, where is the shark's fin?" Meg asked Gina. "Oh." Gina quickly let go of Meg and took out a small blue crystal ball. She smiled and said, "Because there were too many shark fins, I couldn't bring them back. Therefore, the high priestess gave me the sub-ball of the mother-child crystal ball to store the shark fins and lips." Meg looked at the marble-sized crystal ball in Gina's hand. The dark blue color looked like it contained an ocean. It was indeed similar to the large crystal ball in the hands of the high priest last time, but it was much smaller. It looked like it was a spatial artifact. "A lot. How many are there?" Meg asked. Gina thought for a moment and said, "There are about 500 of them." If I release them, they can fill up the entire kitchen. Meg observed 3 seconds of silence for the nether sharks. Then, he looked at Gina and said, then release 50 servings first. I need to dry them. I still have to make 2 servings of Buddha jumps over the wall today. I'm here for work. Camilla pushed the door open and entered. She glanced at everyone and greeted them casually. Then, she walked straight to the kitchen. When she saw that there was no one in the kitchen, she turned back to look at Meg in surprise. Where is Miss Phyllis? The lady who told me to cut the vegetables. Meg looked at Camilla and said, she has already left. From today onwards, you will be in charge of the food preparation work. Title: Beginner Stool. Left. Left. Camilla was stunned. She pointed at the list of ingredients at the side and raised her voice. Doesn't that mean that I have to cut all these vegetables by myself? Meg said nonchalantly, this is Phyllis's daily job. If you find it difficult, I can take care of part of it. Camilla waved her hand and said confidently, there's no need for that. How can I not complete such a simple job? Meg glanced at his watch and said with a smile, there's still an hour before business starts. Then, you can start first. Camilla snorted and went upstairs to change into her chef's uniform. She quickly entered the restaurant and equipped 10 knives. Then, she began to cut the ingredients. Starting tomorrow morning, our restaurant will provide breakfast for the cleaners for free. Meg announced during lunch. Providing breakfast for free? Does that mean we won't charge you? Yabemia was a little surprised. Everyone else also looked at Meg. With the price of Mamis dishes, that was not a small sum of money. Meg nodded slightly and said, those cleaners have to start work at 4 in the morning. The weather is so cold, but they can only eat breakfast that is as cold as ice. They can't even drink a sip of hot water. I felt that we should do something, so I went to talk to the person in charge about providing breakfast for them. At least until the end of this winter. They are so pitiful. Last time, I saw an old man fall into the snow. Luckily, I managed to dodge in time. The uncle next to him helped him to the hospital. After that, I never saw him again. Amy said with pity. Meg looked at Amy in surprise. He did not expect that he was so close to bankruptcy. Boss, when will the breakfast be provided? Will it be the same as the restaurant's business hours? Yabemia asked. Meg shook his head and said, no, the agreed time is 7 in the morning every day. However, I will take care of this matter. You don't have to worry about it. The business hours will not change. Boss, you are really a good person. Yabemia gave Meg a thumbs up and said with a smile, then, starting tomorrow morning, I will come to the restaurant earlier. This guy, is he purposely increasing his favorability? Those humans who sweep the floor are not slaves. It's just a job. What's so pitiful about them? Camilla looked at Meg and pursed her lips with disdain. Humans just like to make a mountain out of a molehill. My business hours are the same as Mia's, Elizabeth said coldly. Barbara blinked and said, since you are all here, then. I will sleep a little longer. The blankets in winter are too comfortable. I don't want to get out of bed at all. I will wake up early. Gina raised her hand and said word by word in the common language of the continent. Then, she gave Meg a big smile. I will also wake up early. Anna raised her little hand and said as well. Amy thought for a while, and seriously said, if you are all going to wake up early, then I will have to help you all sleep a little longer. Otherwise, you will be tired during the day. Meow. Ugly Duckling put its 2 front paws on Amy's stool and meowed at her. It's okay, Ugly Duckling. I will help you sleep in your portion, too. Just wake up early, Amy consoled. Chapter 1132. Outside Mamis, a bald middle-aged man looked at Sith agitatedly, and said, Boss, submit the letter of challenge and issue a challenge to Mamis. Our restaurant's business has doubled during this period, and our new customers are full of praise. The first place on the soup chart should belong to us. It's almost business hours now. It's not very good to submit a letter of challenge at this time. The owner of Sith Restaurant, who was wearing a black chef suit, held a letter of challenge in his hand with a hesitant expression. The bald middle-aged man shook his head and said, "No, there are so many customers here. They can be witnesses, and we have to tell everyone that our Sith restaurant's freshwater seafood soup is the real first place on the soup chart. Only then can the Food Association re-rank it. There are so many customers here, and they're still deceived by the wrong ranking on the delicious cuisine chart. This is a ranking that belongs to us. These customers should be queuing outside Sith restaurant. Boss, shouldn't we fight for our rights and make a sound?" Sith looked at the hundreds of people queuing outside Mammoth and fell silent. Although Sith restaurant's business was also very good now, it was still a far cry from Mammoth. If Sith restaurant's business could reach this level, then he would have reached the peak of his life. "Alright, let's go and submit the letter of challenge now. We'll have a fair duel to decide who's the real first place on the soup chart." Sith's gaze became determined, and he walked straight to Mammoth. The bald man quickly followed after him. "Who are they? Are they here to cut the queue?" The customers in the long queue looked curiously at the two people walking straight to the restaurant's entrance. If I remember correctly, isn't that the owner of Sith Restaurant? What's he doing here? Sith Restaurant's freshwater seafood soup is not bad. It's quite delicious. Yes, they're freshly caught freshwater seafood. The ingredients are solid, and the quantity is not small. Just the soup alone is indeed one of the rare delicacies in Chaos City. Very soon, some people in the queue recognized Sith, and started discussing. Sith came to the restaurant's door, and was about to knock. The bell on the door rang, and the door opened from the inside. Meg opened the door and saw a middle-aged man in a black chef's uniform with his hand raised. He asked curiously, "Excuse me, is there anything I can help you with?" "Hello, Mr. Meg. I am the owner and head chef of Sith Restaurant, Sith." Sith extended his hand towards Meg. "Hello, Boss Sith." Meg reached out and shook his hand. He remembered that the freshwater seafood soup, which was ranked second on the soup rankings, came from Sith Restaurant. This Boss Sith had rushed over aggressively, and it didn't seem like he was here to eat. Sith retracted his hand, looked at Meg, and went straight to the point. "First of all, congratulations to your restaurant for dominating the 6 rankings in the last delicious cuisine ranking. Today, I'm here to challenge you for the first place of the soup ranking. Your braised chicken and rice is indeed excellent, but I also think that my ancestral freshwater seafood soup is not inferior to any other soup. Therefore, I want to have a duel with you to determine the real number 1 on the soup list." "Oh, so you're here to challenge me." Meg understood. Speaking of which, ever since he defeated the head chef of Duca's restaurant, his reputation had spread far and wide. He hadn't been provoked or challenged for a while. He didn't expect someone to challenge him after dominating the 6 rankings. It really surprised him. "Yes, this is the letter of challenge. Please accept it, Mr. Meg." Sith handed over the letter of challenge in his hand. Meg hesitated for a moment, then reached out to take the letter of challenge. He didn't have a bad impression of this Boss Sith. People with skills would more or less have some pride. The first and second places were natural opponents. If they couldn't accept it, a duel would happen sooner or later. He glanced at the letter of challenge. It was similar to what Sith had said before. With soup as the theme of the duel, a famous gourmet and the president of the Food Association would be invited to be the judges for a professional duel. And the wager was the number 1 on the soup rankings. To be honest, Meg didn't like this kind of meaningless challenge. However, if he were to decline, it would inevitably weaken his prestige. He couldn't help but think about it for a while. Wow, he's actually here to challenge Mr. Mac. This Boss Sith is a little stubborn, isn't he? The duel between the first and second places on the soup rankings feels like it'll be a very exciting duel. Speaking of which, after the Buddha jumps over the wall was born, are there any other soups? If nothing goes wrong, it'll probably be a one-sided battle, right? When the customers heard Sith's words, they immediately started discussing. The bald middle-aged man behind Sith looked at Mag, and sarcastically said, "Could it be that you are scared? If you don't dare to accept the challenge, as long as you explain it to the Food Association and ask them to change the soup rankings so that Sith Restaurant's freshwater seafood soup is ranked first, we won't force you to do anything. Sith looked at the bald man with some displeasure. However, this matter concerned the future of Sith Restaurant, so he didn't say anything. He looked at Meg and waited for his answer. Meg looked at the bald man and smiled slightly. He folded the letter of challenge and smiled at Sith. Since Boss Sith has invited me so kindly, I'll accept this letter of challenge. However, you're the one who issued the challenge, and you're the one who set the rules. I'll decide the time and place. That shouldn't be a problem, right? Sith was a little surprised by Meg's straightforwardness. He thought for a while and nodded. Then the time will be set at 4:30 p.m. tonight. The duel will take place in front of Immerse. My restaurant will open for business at 5 p.m. sharp, so I'll have to ask Boss Sith to start cooking earlier. Oh, right. There's one more thing I have to say in advance. The braised chicken and rice from before has been classified as a staple dish by me. I just released a soup called Buddha Jumps Over the Wall yesterday. Because this soup takes up to a day to cook, I won't be cooking it on the spot. I'll be making the finished product directly. I hope everyone knows. Meg continued. A newly released soup. Sith was even more surprised. The braised chicken soup from before had already been approved by the Food Association. He didn't expect Meg to abandon it and prepare a newly released soup to duel with him. Oh, about the wager, other than the first place on the soup rankings, I'd like to increase it a little, Meg said again. Sith looked at Meg with some vigilance and asked, increase what? The loser has to pay 10,000 copper coins, Meg said with a smile. Chapter 1133. Wow. Mr. Mac accepted the challenge. Looks like I'll have to ask the boss for leave tonight to watch the duel. I usually line up at this time. Looks like I'll be able to watch a good show for free today. Is anyone betting? I'm betting on Mr. Mac. No idiot would bet on a duel without any suspense. The customers were getting excited when they saw Meg accept the challenge. 10,000 copper coins? Sith was stunned. He thought that Meg would raise a big bet. After all, the owner of Ricky's rotisserie lost the entire rotisserie to Mr. Mac when they dueled. He didn't expect that Meg would only raise the bet to 10,000 copper coins. Heh, looks like this guy is really scared. The bald man looked at Meg with disdain. His eyes were burning with passion. As an old employee of Sith's restaurant, he was waiting for the freshwater seafood soup to reach first place. Then, he would flatter the boss and open a new restaurant. When that happened, he would be the best choice for the new restaurant's manager. And the freshwater seafood soup recipe that had been in the boss's hands would probably be passed on to him, right? Yes, 10,000 copper coins. Meg nodded. Okay, I accept. Sith thought for a moment and nodded. I accept the challenge. Mr. Sith, please go ahead. I'm going to open for business. Meg put away the challenge and opened the door. He stepped aside and smiled. Welcome, Immerse. Mr. Mac, do you need my help? Crassus looked at Sith when he walked to the door. I can help too. Amy came forward, eager to try. That won't be necessary. Meg hurriedly said. He was a little afraid that Crassus and Amy would kill the two of them with a fireball. That would be too cruel. Good luck, Mr. Meg. Gloria stopped when she reached the door. She clenched her little fist and encouraged him with a smile. What right does this guy have to make my lovely Miss Gloria smile? Camilla stood in the corner and looked at Meg with resentment. She gritted her teeth and said, there is no true love between the opposite sex. Thank you. Meg nodded with a smile. Inexplicably, he felt a chill down his spine. Meg greeted the regulars familiarly and ignored Sith. This unreasonable guy. The bald man was a little annoyed and wanted to go forward to reason. That's enough. He's already shown enough self-restraint and magnanimity. If it were me, I'm afraid I wouldn't be able to do that. Sith interrupted the bald man's words and took a deep look at Meg. Although this man was young, his calmness made him a little uneasy. Let's go to the Food Association first and visit a few gourmets. All right. The bald man retracted his gaze unwillingly and turned to catch up with Sith. Mr. Mac, is there still no news about Miss Shirley? Perhaps she wrote you a letter? Constantine asked expectantly as he came in front of Meg. Meg looked at Constantine and was a little shocked. This eligible bachelor who always paid attention to his appearance and even combed his hair meticulously had lost a lot of weight in just a few days. His black eyes were sunken and bloodshot. His hair was messy, and his beard was unkempt. He looked just like a tramp. She didn't send us a letter. Meg shook his head. However, looking at Constantine's appearance, he couldn't bear it. Why did he have such a one-sided love? Moreover, the other party might take out something bigger than him. There's still no news. Constantine seemed to have lost all his strength. His body swayed, and he barely managed to stand up by grabbing onto the door frame at the side. I hate it so much. I hate that I didn't have the courage to confess my feelings to her in time. I only understood how important she was to me after I lost her. Constantine was already sobbing with tears streaming down his face. What an infatuated man. Yes. There aren't many good men like him nowadays. Many of the regulars had an impression of Constantine. During this period, he often came to ask about Shirley. The regulars naturally remembered that beautiful and quiet elf attendant. They couldn't help but sigh when they saw Constantine like this. Constantine, male, 33 years old. Due to lovesickness, severe insomnia, loss of appetite, rapid decline of bodily functions, and extremely poor immunity. If this state continues, his life will be in danger. Is this guy Liang Shanbois? He can even get lovesickness. Meg raised his eyebrows as he looked at the test results given by the omniscient door. It seemed like Shirley's sudden departure was a big blow to Constantine. After thinking for a while, he looked at the heartbroken Constantine, and said, Mr. Constantine, Shirley said that she would come back, but it might be a few years later. She will really come back. Constantine suddenly raised his head and looked at Meg as if he had grabbed onto a life-saving straw. Meg nodded with a smile, and said, however, with the lifespan of elves, Shirley's appearance shouldn't change much no matter how many years pass. If Mr. Constantine continues to live in this state, I'm afraid the next time we meet will be at your funeral. Constantine looked at his pale and thin hands that were almost devoid of blood, and was stunned. During this period of time, he was immersed in sorrow and longing, and had given up on himself. He almost didn't pay attention to his own body. He didn't expect it to be so weak. No. Before Miss Shirley comes back, I have to stay healthy, and slow down my aging. I can't let myself age too quickly. Otherwise, Miss Shirley won't be able to recognize me. Constantine quickly made up his mind. He looked at Meg, and said, Mr. Meg, thank you. Even if it's just to see Miss Shirley again, and to tell her the words that I didn't have time to say back then, I will definitely live on well. After saying that, he strode into the restaurant and sat down at his familiar seat. I hope you can live on with determination when your confession fails. Meg shrugged, and continued to greet the next customer with a smile. Ma-am, the charging station for men, I'm here again. A man walked towards Ma-am with light steps, and his eyes were full of passion. Vicenio had already experienced the saying of a newlywed who was like a wolf and a tiger. However, he didn't expect this newlywed period to last so long. His tigress was getting more and more ferocious, and almost squeezed him dry in bed every day. If it weren't for Ma-am's 2 Ruggiamos providing him with motivation every day, he felt that he would have died in bed long ago. Vicenio made up his mind and quickened his pace. No, I'll have to eat another Ruggiamo to make up for it. Chapter 1134. Waiter, I'd like 3 Ruggiamos and a savory tofu pudding, Vicenio ordered as soon as he sat down. All right. Yarbemia nodded. Just then, a fragrant breeze wafted over, and a voluptuous woman sat beside Vicenio. She smiled, and said, I'd like 3 Ruggiamos and a savory tofu pudding, too. Vicenio's mouth opened wide when he smelled the familiar fragrance, and he slowly turned around in disbelief. When he saw the woman sitting beside him and sizing him up with a smile, he jumped up from his chair like a mouse whose tail had been stepped on. He exclaimed, "Honey, why are you here?" Everyone in the restaurant looked over. Loud noises were not allowed at Mammis. Vicenio's skinny appearance was not much better than Constantine's. His face was pale, and he looked like he had kidney deficiency. On the other hand, the young woman sitting beside him had a rosy face, a voluptuous figure, and a charming face. Her eyes were full of gentleness. "Honey, you scared me," the young woman said coquettishly as she patted her chest gently. Her breasts shook, and she had a shy look on her face. Who can withstand this? Many men swallowed their saliva subconsciously, and they didn't know whether to look at Vicenio with envy or pity. Vicenio quickly realized that he had overreacted. Thinking of Mammis rules, he hurriedly sat down again, and apologized to Yarbemia, who was still standing at the side. He looked at Bonnie, and softly said, "Honey, why are you here? Weren't you asleep?" "How can I sleep when you're gone?" Bonnie clenched her small fist and punched Vicenio's shoulder as she said with an aggrieved expression, "That's why I followed you out. When I saw you enter this restaurant, I was also hungry, so I followed you in. Why do you look so unhappy? Could it be that eating with me is something that makes you unhappy? How can that be? I saw that you were tired, so I didn't call you." Vicenio wanted to slap himself. He actually didn't realize that Bonnie was followed by Bonnie. "No, you're the one who's tired." Bonnie took out a silk handkerchief from her chest and wiped Vicenio's forehead. "Look, you're sweating." I just walked over. It's just a little sweat." Vicenio's voice was trembling. His wife was a tigress, not a shy kitten. She would only act like this in front of outsiders. If they were in bed, it would be a different story. Cough, cough. Mia, who was being fed dog food at the side, cleared her throat and interrupted the two of them. "Both of you want 3 Ruggiamos and a savory tofu pudding each, right?" "Yes, I want the same as him." Bonnie smiled and nodded. She sized up Mia and praised, "Miss, you're really beautiful." She then glanced at Vicenio from the corner of her eyes. Did this bastard come out to eat every day because of the beautiful waitresses in this restaurant? Vicenio could only pretend that he didn't understand Bonnie's gaze. He hurriedly interrupted, "No, no. Honey, the Ruggiamos aren't delicious. They don't suit your taste. You can have the rainbow fried rice. That's beautiful and delicious. And the tofu pudding. You usually like to eat sweet things. Although I chose the savory side, the sweet tofu pudding might suit your taste better." Rainbow fried rice? Bonnie's eyes lit up when she heard that. The name of the dish sounded quite interesting. Could this restaurant really use beautiful rainbows to cook fried rice? But why did her own bastard stop her from eating Ruggiamos? A hint of suspicion appeared in Bonnie's eyes. "Honey, hurry up and order. The other customers are still waiting." Vicenio felt a little guilty. He then directly said to Yarbemia, "Give her a Yangju fried rice and a sweet tofu pudding. That's all." "All right, please wait a moment." Yarbemia nodded and turned to walk to the next customer. Vicenio heaved a sigh of relief. The Ruggiamos were too strong. He could barely compete with Bonnie after eating them. If Bonnie also ate, he already couldn't imagine the possible outcome. Bonnie sized up the restaurant. The comfortable decorations and perfect partitions. She retracted her gaze and looked at Vicenio sadly. "Honey, you really know how to choose a place. But why didn't you bring me to such an elegant restaurant in the past? You ate alone and didn't care about me at all. It's so sad." Vicenio's forehead was full of sweat as he nervously said, Actually, I also just found this restaurant. I was just about to try it. I'll bring you here next time." "Hey, Uncle Week, don't you come here every day?" Amy was passing by with Ugly Duckling in her arms when she suddenly stopped and asked with a strange expression. "Little boss, you've misunderstood me." Vicenio's face darkened. He looked at Bonnie, whose smile was gradually becoming perverted, and stuttered as he explained, Honey, listen to me. All right, you don't have to say any more. There's plenty of time when we go back," Bonnie said magnanimously. Vicenio sighed silently in his heart. He already knew what was going to happen when he went back today. Not long after, Yarbemia came over with a tray and placed the food they had ordered in front of them. Your Rugiamos, Yangju fried rice, and tofu pudding. Vicenio quickly took the 3 Rugiamos and placed them next to his hand. Then, he placed the Yangju fried rice and sweet tofu pudding in front of Bonnie with a smile. Honey, here's your rainbow fried rice and sweet tofu pudding. I heard that your skin will become very good after eating this tofu pudding. Bonnie looked at Vicenio with a scrutinizing expression, and said, I was wondering why you're becoming more and more tender. So, you've been eating these supplements behind my back every day. Are you planning to find another rich woman to keep you when I'm old? Although Vicenio was indeed a pretty boy who relied on his looks to make a living, he really didn't think that way. One Bonnie was already enough to make his legs go weak. How could he be in the mood to find another rich woman? He only ate the tofu pudding because it was really delicious. All right, I believe you. Bonnie stared at Vicenio for a while, and nodded without waiting for his explanation. Then, she picked up the spoon, scooped up a spoonful of the beautiful fried rice, and put it into her mouth. Oh, this is such a wonderful taste. Bonnie's face lit up with amazement after just chewing. The wonderful taste of all the ingredients bloomed in this mouth, and the more she chewed, the more fragrant it became. It really made her feel so blissful. After swallowing, she couldn't help but put another spoonful into her mouth. She couldn't help but indulge in the delicious taste. Vicenio heaved a sigh of relief when he saw the blissful smile on Bonnie's face. He also picked up the Rugiamo. The 2 layers of soft and fragrant Baiji bread sandwiched the tender braised meat. He bit into it, and the delicious gravy flowed out. Every taste bud on the tip of his tongue seemed to be cheering and jumping for joy. He closed his eyes and felt the blood in his body become violent, constantly repairing and filling up the holes in his body. It made him feel as if his empty body was gradually being filled up. Whispering in the pugilistic world. Chapter 1135. After finishing a bowl of delicious Yangju fried rice and a bowl of sweet tofu pudding, Bonnie licked her lips, and her gaze landed on the remaining Rugiamo next to Vicenio's hand. How can she eat so fast? Vicenio was shocked. He wasn't even halfway through his second Rugiamo. He slowly turned his body to block Bonnie's view and took another big bite of the Rugiamo. He had to finish it quickly. Honey, it seems that you can't finish it. Let me help you with the last one. A hand came close to his body and grabbed the Rugiamo. No. Vicenio was shocked. He stared at the hand that grabbed the Rugiamo slowly retracted. He forced himself to look at Bonnie calmly, and said, Honey, this Rugiamo is really not suitable for you. Why don't you have ice cream? It's also super delicious. No, I have to try this Rugiamo today. Bonnie shook her head. Then, she took a bite of the Rugiamo under Vicenio's gradually widening eyes. Crunch. The crispy skin made a light crisp sound, and the braised meat juices in the middle of the soft and sweet Baiji bread splashed everywhere. Unlike the refreshing taste of the Yangju fried rice, this meat juices were full and domineering. It was as if a ladle of water had been splashed on boiling oil, and the taste buds were instantly activated. What was even more incredible was that after swallowing, the deliciousness bloomed in the mouth and turned into a fiery aura that wreaked havoc in the body. It was as if a little monster had entered the body, causing the entire person to become restless and hot. Tilda Bonnie's lips parted slightly, and she let out a moan of ecstasy with a slightly red face. Tilda at the same time, there was a crisp sound of cloth tearing. Bonnie's clothes were torn open, and her full breasts were almost exposed. Oh, this feeling is simply too wonderful. Bonnie wasn't aware of this at all. Her mind was only filled with this thought. After the initial stimulation of the heat in her body disappeared, she didn't feel uncomfortable. Instead, she felt warm and numb. The exhaustion from last night's and this morning's battle instantly disappeared. She even felt like she could fight another 300 rounds. It's over. Vicenio reached out to block Bonnie's exposed chest. His mind was completely blank. He was finished today. Bonnie opened her eyes and looked at Vicenio coquettishly. She punched his chest with her little fist and said coquettishly, "Hubby, you're so naughty. How could you hide such a good thing for yourself to eat?" Vicenio wanted to cry. "I'll deal with you when we get back." Bonnie licked her lips and continued eating the Ruggiamo in her hand. "I didn't expect that such a decent-looking restaurant would actually sell this kind of medicine, and it's so delicious. This boss is really a genius." Bonnie looked in the direction of the kitchen. No wonder her husband was getting better and better. It turned out that he came here every day to cheer her on. Vicenio finished the 2 Ruggiamos with a dumbfounded expression, paid the bill, and followed Bonnie out of the restaurant in a daze. "Honey, listen to me. The sun is shining brightly today. Why don't we?" Vicenio said seriously after getting on the carriage. "Why don't we play something more exciting? We haven't tried it on a moving carriage yet." Bonnie smiled wickedly. She was already on top of him. Her soft and familiar hands unbuttoned his clothes, and she took off her clothes while she was at it. The coachman felt the unusual shaking of the carriage and some strange noises. He looked down and continued to drive the carriage calmly. "You want me to be the judge for the challenge?" In the Food Association building, Robert looked at Sith in surprise. Sith nodded. "Yes. Mr. Meg has already accepted my challenge, so I would like to invite you to be the main judge for this duel." The second place on the soup rankings was challenging the first place on the soup rankings. This was the first duel after the launch of the Delicious Cuisine rankings. This Delicious Cuisine rankings caused a huge commotion at the beginning because Mamis dominated the 6 rankings. However, most of them were negative reviews and negative comments about the Delicious Cuisine rankings. However, as time passed, this sincere ranking still won the approval of the customers with one delicious dish after another. Even for Mami Restaurant, which was the most controversial restaurant in the city, after more and more customers tried it for themselves and word of mouth spread, it completely reversed its reputation, and was basically confirmed as the #1 restaurant in Chaos City. However, although Mamis was good at everything, its soup was indeed a little weak. Robert could be considered a regular at Mamis. He had tried the braised chicken and rice a few times, so there was no need to talk about the taste. The soup was also very delicious. However, to call it a soup, it was indeed a little difficult to say that there was only enough soup for the rice. Sith Restaurant's freshwater seafood soup was indeed one of the best soups. Robert often went there to try it. Robert pondered for a while, and then nodded. "Since that's the case, I agree to be the judge for this soup duel." Delicacies needed innovation. Only then could they bring more delicious food to the diners and enrich the cuisine. Appropriate competition could also promote innovation. It was undeniable that Mr. Mac was indeed a genius. Every dish had a bold and imaginative idea. His revolutionary cooking method brought a fresh feeling to the entire food and beverage industry. Since both parties had agreed, he might be able to encourage the chefs to go on the path of innovation by attending the event as the president of the Food Association. Sith's face lit up, and he quickly said, "Thank you, then." The duel will be at 4:30 p.m. today at the entrance of Mamis. After leaving the Food Association, Sith went to visit the sharp-tongued critic, Febid. "What? You want to duel with Mr. Mac?" Febid, who was writing his script, looked up at Sith as if he was an idiot. "Is your face itching?" "Mr. Febid, Sith wanted to explain. "All right. Anyway, I have nothing to do in the afternoon. I was planning to go to Mamis for dinner, so I'll be the judge while I'm at it." Febid interrupted Sith, and continued to write his script. "Go out. I need to work." "Thank you." Sith turned and left. Although he knew Febid's character was like that, he still felt a little bloodthirsty after being mocked like that. "My freshwater seafood soup will never lose to anyone," Sith said to himself with confidence as he clenched his fists. Sith then went to look for 3 slightly famous gourmets in Chaos City, and invited them to be the judges for the duel. He then returned to the restaurant to prepare for the duel. It was just past 4 p.m., and there was already a crowd outside Mamis. However, there was only a stove and a brownish-black wine jar at the entrance of the restaurant. Chapter 1136. Is this the soup that the boss of Mammoth is going to use for the duel? Why isn't anyone watching it? Isn't it too casual? Yeah. I specially came here to cheer for Sith Restaurant's freshwater seafood soup. It's the #1 soup in my heart. It's irreplaceable. I heard that this boss is going to use a new dish to duel with Boss Sith. He's really full of confidence. There's no fragrance at all. Could it be that it's boiled water? Many of the onlookers had heard about the duel and rushed over to watch the show. At this moment, the restaurant's door was closed and not a single person could be seen. There was a stove at the entrance, and a wine jar was boiling on top of it. The onlookers were also discussing in low voices to pass the time before the duel began. The restaurant's regulars were rather calm. Although not many people tasted Buddha jumps over the wall yesterday, the fragrance that successfully lured the prisoners from the neighboring prison to break out, and the scene that caused the city lord, the lord of the city, and the warden to appear at the same time was still lingering in their minds. Please make way. Sith Restaurant is here. Right at this moment, a horse-drawn carriage drove over, and the bald man shouted loudly from the carriage. Everyone made way, and the horse-drawn carriage stopped at the restaurant's door. Sith walked out of the horse-drawn carriage, and was stunned when he saw the wine jar at the door. Could this be the soup that Meg was going to use to duel with him? This was the first time he had seen such a cooking vessel. Ha! He's just using some weird things to attract attention. The bald man sneered, and started to move all the kitchenware from the carriage with the staff. Soon, a very professional stove was set up in front of Mammoth. There were pots, bowls, ladles, basins, all kinds of knives, and kitchenware. That's right. That's what a professional chef is like. What's the big deal about setting up a jar here? Everyone's interest was piqued when they saw how the people from Sith Restaurant worked. Cooking wasn't a rare thing, but cooking well was something that required a lot of skill. The same kitchenware, the same ingredients, and even the same steps, but the food made by different people would have a completely different taste. Because Sith Restaurant was ranked #2 on the soup rankings, it had jumped from a small restaurant to a new restaurant in Chaos City. The delicious freshwater seafood soup was famous. How was it made? It really made people curious. Sith glanced at the tightly shut restaurant door and withdrew his gaze. He began to check if all the kitchen utensils and condiments were prepared. He turned to the bald man and asked, "Are the ingredients ready?" "I've already informed them. They should be on their way here. Old Joseph always fishes in the cleanest waters outside the city. The quality is the best." The bald man nodded. "Boss Sith, I've brought the fish and prawns you asked for." At this moment, a voice came from outside. The crowd opened up a path, and a white-haired old man with his sleeves rolled up walked in with a wooden bucket. He placed the bucket on the ground and heaved a sigh of relief. The wooden barrel was half filled with clear water. Shrimps and small fishes were swimming happily in the water, and there were more than a dozen clams at the bottom. Wow, the water is so clean, and the freshwater fish are so fresh. Did they just come up from the river? Only freshly caught freshwater fish would be so energetic. Sith Restaurant really uses the freshest ingredients. You can see how fresh and clean they are. No wonder the soup is so delicious every time. People came forward to take a look and couldn't help but praise. "Old Joseph, thank you for your hard work." Sith looked at the freshwater fish in the wooden barrel and revealed a satisfied smile. The quality of Old Joseph's goods had always been the best, and this time was no exception. The bald man gave the money to Old Joseph, then carefully poured the fish and prawns in the wooden barrel into the prepared wooden basin. The stove was set up, and the ingredients were ready. Sith glanced at the time. There were still about 10 minutes to the agreed time. "Oh, is everything ready?" Robert walked in from the crowd and saw that everything was ready. His gaze landed on the wine jar at the door, and he couldn't help but be stunned. What was Mr. Mac trying to do? There are quite a lot of people. Are you afraid that no one will know if you lose? Febid squeezed through the crowd with some difficulty. He tidied his clothes and said with a displeased expression. A middle-aged woman wearing a white mink coat walked in with a smile, and said, "The battle between the first and second place on the soup rankings. It's really a battle that I look forward to." Old Master Avis walked in with a smile and greeted Robert. "Yes, I heard that Mr. Meg has a new creation. I'm really looking forward to it." A young man in a blue robe walked in with a smile and said, "All the seniors are here. It makes me seem very out of place. Boss Sith, you didn't tell me in advance. Otherwise, how would I dare to show off in front of all the seniors?" Wow, what a luxurious lineup of judges. Mr. Robert, the president of the Food Association, Mr. Febid, the sharp-tongued food critic, Candice, who just came back from Rodu, the former head chef of Reed's Roast Pig, Old Master Avis, and Randy, who just became a special columnist for the Carnivorous magazine. This lineup is really invincible. The surrounding crowd looked at the 5 people who came in one after another, and were all shocked. They didn't expect such a high-level judge to be invited for a battle like this. It seemed like Boss Sith really wanted to decide the result of this battle with authority. Robert looked at his watch and doubtfully said, "It's almost time." "Mr. Mac hasn't come out yet?" Candice looked at the tightly shut restaurant door and said with a smile, "Seems like the owner of this restaurant is a little arrogant. The judges are already here, but he still hasn't come out." Ding! Right at this moment, the restaurant door opened outwards, and Meg, who was wearing a chef's uniform, walked out. He was a little surprised to see so many people crowding around the restaurant door. Then, his gaze landed on Robert and the others standing in front of the restaurant. He smiled and said, "These are the judges for today, right?" "Yes, Mr. Mac. The judges are here, and the battle is about to start." "Please provide seats for the judges," Sith said to Meg. "It's my duty." Meg smiled at the bald man who was standing at the side with a look of disdain, and said, "The waitresses in my restaurant are all weak girls. Then, I'll have to trouble this strong man to help me move the tables and chairs." "Me?" The bald man was stunned and wanted to refute. "Move it. The battle is about to start," Sith said. "Yes." The bald man swallowed the words that were about to come out of his mouth. He called 2 waiters to put the tables together at the door and set up the judges' table. All the judges took their seats. Robert sat in the middle and looked at Meg and Sith and said, "Mr. Mac and Boss Sith are both great chefs with superb culinary skills. Today, we will be having a culinary battle with soup. The 5 of us will be the judges, and the winner will be decided by voting. Does either side have any objections?" Chapter 1137. No objections. Meg nodded. Sith was indeed an upright person. The judges he found were all reputable figures, so they wouldn't be too biased. No objections. Sith nodded as well. Robert raised his hand to look at his watch, and then said, "All right, according to your agreement, this culinary duel will officially begin in 3 minutes. Both parties, please get ready." Sith returned to the front of the stove and began the final preparations. The waiters and chefs of Sith restaurant were also very nervous. After all, this concerned the reputation and future of Sith restaurant. Success or failure depended on this. In contrast to the nervousness of the people at Sith restaurant, it was a different scene at Mammoth. "Boss, please take a seat." Yarbemia moved a chair over, placed it beside the stove, and stood behind the chair. "Thank you." Mag nodded slightly and sat down beside the warm stove. He crossed his legs and squinted his eyes casually. This stove was quite comfortable to roast in, and there was a light aroma of charcoal and fruits. The Buddha jumps over the wall only needed to be simmered on the stove, and it would be ready when the time was up. Hence, all he had to do now was to wait. Elizabeth and the others also stood behind Meg in a neat row with relaxed expressions. Amy moved a small stool and sat beside Meg's feet with Ugly Duckling in her arms. She raised her little hand and tried to stretch Ugly Duckling towards the stove. Ugly Duckling was so scared that it hugged her little hand tightly and refused to let go, causing her to laugh happily. Anna stood at the side and carefully grabbed Ugly Duckling's swaying tail to prevent it from really flinging its tail into the stove. If that happened, it would really become very ugly. I say, is this really a proper culinary duel? Why do I feel that the boss and employees of Mammoth are here to watch the show? This boss is quite honest. These waitresses are too beautiful, aren't they? They are really winners in life. But those two lollies are too cute, aren't they? Ah, that kitten is so pitiful. Please change it to me. Outside Amy's, there were no less than 500 onlookers. Most of them were waiting in line to eat, while the rest were there to watch the show after hearing about the duel. However, everyone was rather surprised to see Amy and the others. Of course, most of them were looking at Amy, who was playing with Ugly Duckling, and Anna, who was standing off to the side. The cute little Lolita paired with the cute round kitten really made people unable to take their eyes off of them. The women standing behind Meg in a neat row also made people's eyes light up. They looked at Meg with eyes full of envy and jealousy. Because his performance was too leisurely, it even gave people the illusion that they were the real spectators. But he was clearly the main character of this duel, wasn't he? Candace looked at Meg, who was crossing his legs, and said with a displeased expression, "This head chef of Mammoth is quite ostentatious. The duel is about to start, and not only is he not preparing, he even set up a chair for himself." In order to be known as the Queen of Cookery in Rodu, Candace had put in much more effort than any man. Step by step, she walked out of the doubt and ridicule, and became one of the top 10 chefs in Rodu with influence. As a person of action, she couldn't stand those frivolous chefs. These fellows usually had more temper than ability, and couldn't achieve much. And now, Meg's performance was arrogance and disdain for this duel in her eyes. This was a very frivolous performance. Has he already given up on this duel? Avis also showed a hint of doubt as he looked at Meg, puzzled. "I think this boss is an interesting person. He's someone who knows how to enjoy life," Randy said with a smile. A smile appeared on Randy's face. His gaze landed on the 4 waitresses with different styles standing behind Mag, and his smile became even more radiant. Dining in this restaurant must be a delightful experience for the eyes. Sith glanced at the leisurely Meg, and his gaze landed on the wine jar on the stove at the side. Meg had told him before that the soup he was going to make would take a long time to cook, so he would start cooking in advance. He had already informed him of this in advance. It seemed like this jar contained the soup he was going to use to duel with him today. He only knows how to put on an act. "Let's see if he can still sleep when he loses," the bald man mumbled softly as he looked at Meg unhappily. "Change the water and get ready to cook," Sith said calmly as he retracted his gaze. He was faintly uneasy. Although he was very confident in his ancestral freshwater seafood soup, he suddenly felt uncertain when he saw Meg's relaxed expression. What is this new product that this fellow is launching? Is it really better than the braised chicken soup from before? Mr. Meg is a humble and polite person. He's also a chef who treasures cooking. Boss Sith told me before that the soup Mr. Meg is going to cook would take a long time, so he would start cooking in advance. This is something that both parties have no objections to, Robert explained with a smile. Candace smiled coldly, and said with slight mockery, since the timing is not equal, then this is not a fair duel. I've never heard of such a strange duel of culinary skills. Who can guarantee that this soup was made by him? Then what's the point of this duel? Isn't this too unfair? Boss Sith hasn't started cooking yet, and that boss has already started cooking. Who knows who made this pot of soup? Maybe it was made by someone else. The culinary queen really saw the problem with one look. Candace's speech stirred up the enthusiasm and curiosity of the spectators. They all started to find loopholes and construct conspiracy theories. These fellows, how can they talk nonsense? This was clearly made by the boss alone. Yarbemia looked at Candace with some annoyance. This woman was a judge. If she stood on Sith's side before watching the duel, that would be terrible. Mammoth's regulars were all unhappy when they heard that. Mr. Mac looking for someone else to cook for him. This is probably the funniest joke I've heard this year, right? Harrison could not help but laugh. His words also caused the regulars of Mammoth to burst into laughter. Sitting by the fire, Meg, who was so comfortable that he almost fell asleep, opened his eyes. He looked at Candace with a smile, and said, "Madam, before you understand the situation, I suggest you watch your words. This duel was initiated by Boss Sith. He proposed the format and theme of the duel. I set the time and place, and clearly told the other party that the soup I'm cooking will take more than 5 hours. In order not to waste everyone's time, I will start cooking in advance. As for inviting someone else to cook for me, please be clear-headed. This is a duel between the first and second place of the soup leaderboard, and Mamis is first. May I ask, which chef should I invite to cook this pot of soup on my behalf to face this duel where the honor of a chef is at stake? Chapter 1138. The chattering stopped in an instant, and there was silence at the entrance of Mamis' restaurant. The onlookers who were discussing the unfairness of the competition and how Mammy might have cheated shut their mouths one by one, feeling their faces burning. Candace was stunned for a moment. Meg's words were like a loud slap to her face, mocking her intelligence without hiding it. The anger in her heart burned fiercely. But as he said, since this was a duel between the first and second place, if he could find a chef better than Sith to replace him, then Sith would still not be first place. And the rules of the culinary duel were that as long as both parties agreed, then it would be established. In this aspect, Meg did not leave any loopholes. Candace was angry, but she could not vent it. Her wrinkled face was red with anger. She looked at the wine jar and sneered, "I have been cooking for 40 years, and I have never heard of a soup that takes more than 5 hours to cook. Even the tendons of magical beasts don't take that long to cook." Meg smiled, and said, "It's okay. Maybe you don't understand what kind of soup takes more than 5 hours to cook, and you have never tried the deliciousness of a soup made by boiling bones over low heat for a few hours. But if a chef uses his own experience to casually mock the cooking methods of other chefs, it does not make him appear knowledgeable and authoritative. There are many things you have never heard of. You." Candace was so angry that her whole body trembled. As a senior in the culinary world, chefs were usually very respectful when they saw her. She had agreed to be the judge of this duel just now because she saw that Sith's attitude was sincere enough. She did not expect to be mocked by a young junior. Meg ignored Candace and turned to look at Robert. "It's time for the duel. Considering that Boss Sith's time is tight, let's start the duel first." "Okay, let the duel officially begin." Robert nodded and ended this quarrel that had arisen out of nowhere. "Madam Candace, calm down. Let's focus on the duel first." Robert turned to look at Candace, who was sitting beside him, and comforted her softly. "H, this kind of ungentlemanly fellow will definitely not be able to cook any delicious food." Candace snorted coldly. She had already made up her mind. No matter what soup Meg made, she would definitely vote for Sith. After returning to Chaos City, the only meal she'd had outside was the freshwater seafood soup at Sith restaurant. It had indeed given her quite a pleasant surprise. Even in Rodu, just the soup alone was enough to rank in the top 10. This boss is quite impressive. His sharp-tongued style is sharp enough, yet it doesn't lose the elegance of a gentleman. He kills without leaving a trace and chokes people to death without paying for it. Randy looked at Meg in awe. He was really a genius. He hadn't handed in the draft for this month's Meatitarianism column yet. He had been cooped up at home for a month, and even after scratching his head, he still couldn't find any ideas. Today, he agreed to be a judge for Boss Sith because he wanted to go out to find some inspiration. At the same time, he also planned to check the meat rankings on the gourmet cuisine rankings. He only found out today that the gourmet cuisine rankings had changed. "This guy, is he trying to steal my rice bowl?" Febid looked at Meg with more scrutiny and a sense of danger. Such a sharp rebuke made him feel as though he had met a kindred spirit. Mr. Mac is indeed Mr. Mac. The dishes are delicious, and the words he says are so nice. Ha ha ha. I have already become Mr. Mac's little fangirl. The regulars at Mamis cheered up after Meg tore Candace apart with his bare hands. They were also full of confidence. This guy is even going against the judges. Looks like we're definitely going to win today. The bald man was secretly delighted. There was no need to worry. Candace's vote already belonged to Sith restaurant. Sith took a deep look at Meg, and his mood became even more serious. He retracted his gaze, and took a deep breath to calm himself down. He took out a pair of scissors and started to cut the fish and prawns that were still alive, and started to cook the freshwater seafood soup. Seeing that Candace didn't say anything, Meg also closed his eyes again. After a while, he opened his eyes again, and turned to the ladies. "Are you all hungry? Why don't we eat first?" "Heh." The ladies were all stunned. "Let's eat." Amy, who was playing with Ugly Duckling with Anna, suddenly stood up, and nodded her little head. Me. Father, I want to eat. Anyway, there's still half an hour. Let's eat first. We'll be opening soon. It's not good to work on an empty stomach. Meg nodded, got up, and walked into the restaurant. The ladies also followed him into the restaurant. This is too showy, isn't it? Everyone was dumbfounded when they saw the people from Mammoth leave in a group to eat. Arrogant. Absolutely arrogant, Candace said coldly. She had never heard of a contestant who left the judges to the side and went to eat by himself. Yeah, he didn't even bring us along. It's really too despicable. Febid stretched out his head and shouted at Meg's back. "Mr. Mac, bring me along. It's not opening hours yet. Please line up." Meg's calm voice sounded. The door closed slowly, leaving behind a crowd of shocked gazes. The dishes were already prepared. MIA and the others went into the kitchen to bring them out. Everyone sat down and started eating. "Boss, is this a good idea? Will they all vote for that person because of this?" MIA said worriedly. "It's okay. The duel is a small matter. There's no need to affect our normal meals and business because of this." Meg put a piece of fish into Amy's bowl and continued eating. There might be more and more such challenges in the future, but Meg had already decided to reject such meaningless duels. Instead of wasting time and energy on such things, he would rather play with Amy. Outside the restaurant, hundreds of people were watching a strange cooking duel. On one side, in front of a professional stove, Boss Sith was skillfully killing the fish and removing the shrimp lines. A pot of freshwater seafood soup with a strong aroma attracted the audience's exclamations. On the other side, there was a stove all by itself. On top of the stove was a large brown wine jar. There was no viewing experience at all. "What is this? Is this a one-man show?" A confused passerby poked his head in to watch for a while and asked curiously. "I guess so." A passerby who had been watching for a long time nodded. He still could not understand this mysterious duel. Many people even thought that the boss of Amy's had given up on this duel. As time passed, Sith lifted the lid of the soup pot. The rich and fresh aroma immediately spread out. The boiling milky white soup was sprinkled with a handful of green onions. He turned off the fire and scooped out the soup. Bowls of steaming freshwater seafood soup were served in front of the 5 judges. "It smells so good." Everyone's eyes were attracted to the bowls of freshwater seafood soup. Ding! At this moment, the bell hanging on the door of the restaurant made a crisp sound. The door opened, and Meg walked out with a calm expression. "Com. Wonderful book house. Com." Chapter 1139. Watching the process of a chef's cooking had a wonderful effect. When the lid was lifted, the aroma satisfied all the audience's imaginations. Although they did not taste it, they seemed to be certain that it was a very delicious and tempting taste. At that moment, the audience and the 5 judges felt this way. The milky white freshwater seafood soup emitted a tempting fresh aroma. The fresh taste of the fresh fish and shrimp was completely stimulated by the secret seasoning. It was pleasantly surprising and satisfying. The crisp sound of the bell woke everyone up. Everyone looked at Meg, who walked out of the restaurant. Because he went to eat halfway, they almost forgot that this was a cooking competition. "Looks like Boss Sith's freshwater seafood soup is done." Meg glanced at the big bowl of freshwater seafood soup in front of the judges and then looked at the audience's expression. His way of leaving to eat did not seem to be very popular. This boss's behavior is really rude. Yeah, first he insulted the judges, then he left to eat halfway through the competition. Now Boss Sith's freshwater seafood soup is in front of the judges. What does he have to compete with him? Yeah, the aroma of this freshwater seafood soup is too tempting. Pure wild freshwater seafood with fresh ingredients. I've decided to go to Sith restaurant to have a bowl of freshwater seafood soup later. The audience discussed softly. They did not think that Meg could win. Mr. Mac, this bowl is for you. Sith walked over with a bowl of fish soup and handed it to Meg. Meg glanced at Sith. It looked like this person was really confident in his freshwater seafood soup. Was he planning to make him admit defeat? If that was the case, then wouldn't he have to return the favor with a bowl? Wouldn't that be too cruel? Meg showed a hint of hesitation. I think, no matter the result, it should be acknowledged by the other party, Sith said with a smile. Meg reached out to take the bowl of fish soup and nodded with a smile. Boss Sith is right. However, my soup is also coming out of the pot. Let's drink together later. As he said that, he carefully put the bowl of fish soup on the table at the side. This freshwater seafood soup is milky white in color. It's thick but not thick. It perfectly stimulates the freshwater seafood's taste and blends them into this pot of soup. It's really the best soup. Candace lowered his head and sniffed. He then picked up the spoon and scooped up a spoonful of freshwater seafood soup. He gently blew on it a few times before putting it into his mouth. The warm freshwater seafood soup had a warm texture. Although it was not Candace's first time tasting it, he still could not help but praise. The freshness of the freshwater fish, the softness of the clams, the deliciousness of the river prawns. All in one mouthful of soup perfectly. Yet, it has a unique taste. And surprise. It's really delicious. Wow, the legendary cold-faced cooking queen actually gave such a high evaluation. Looks like Boss Sith is really going to win this time, someone exclaimed softly. Febid picked up his spoon and drank a spoonful of soup. He savored the taste for a while before nodding slightly. The soup is a little bland, and the seasoning is still lacking. However, it does have its own uniqueness when it comes to stimulating the taste of the ingredients. In terms of freshwater seafood alone, no one in Chaos City can beat it. It can be considered a good soup. The gourmet Febid, who is known for his sharp tongue, actually gave Boss Sith such a high evaluation. Seems like this vote is in the bag. The bald man mumbled to himself excitedly as if he could already see the light of victory. Boss Sith's culinary skills are as stable as usual. This bowl of freshwater seafood soup is really something I can't get tired of. Although the fish and prawns in winter are not as plump as in autumn, the texture is clearer and has a different taste. It's a good soup. Robert also nodded and praised after drinking a few mouthfuls of soup. Old Master Avis drank a few mouthfuls of soup and smiled at Sith. The best freshwater seafood soup in Rodu is the freshwater seafood soup from Roosevelt Restaurant. It was once awarded the best dish in the Roth Empire's Palace Banquet. This freshwater seafood soup made by head chef Sith is already 80% standard. If he makes some improvements to the side dishes and condiments, it's not impossible for it to surpass Roosevelt Restaurant's freshwater seafood soup one day. The president and Old Master Avis also gave him very high praises. For judges have already expressed their approval for him. Is the result of this duel already out? Everyone turned to look at Randy. How would this young food critic rate this freshwater seafood soup? This won't do. These judges seem to be very satisfied with this bowl of freshwater seafood soup. Is Mr. Mac really going to lose? The regulars at Mammoth also had a tinge of nervousness on their faces. Although they were very confident in Mr. Mac's culinary skills, it seemed like he was also an opponent that could not be underestimated. Boss should win, right? Mia clenched her fists nervously. Although Meg had never lost before, the current situation was really too nerve-wracking. Don't worry. Father is super awesome. He will definitely win, Amy said confidently as she looked at Meg, who was lowering the temperature of the stove. Yes. Uncle Meg is the best chef. Anna nodded her little head and looked at Meg with admiration in her eyes. I'll be proud if you praise me like this. Meg turned to look at the two little ones with a smile. He was in a good mood as he put on a pair of gloves and prepared to remove the lid. On the other side, Randy also picked up his chopsticks and smilingly said, the seniors have all commented on the soup. As a carnivore who can't be happy without meat, I'll try the freshwater seafood in this soup first. As he said that, he picked up a small fish. Although it had been cooked in the soup for a long time, the fish meat did not fall apart, and still maintained the appearance of a whole fish. He put the small fish into a small bowl, and then picked up a piece of fish meat to put into his mouth. Because it was cooked in the soup, the taste of the fish meat is very bland. Also, it should have been cooked for too long, so the fish meat is a little dry. After that, he scooped a spoonful of soup, and then put a piece of fish meat into the soup, and put it into his mouth along with the soup. This is indeed much better. The soup is very rich, and makes up for the bland fish meat perfectly. Furthermore, this soup is richer and more delicious than I expected. If I were to only comment on the soup, it's indeed the most delicious soup I've ever had in Chaos City. Next, let's try the river prawns. Stir-fried river prawns are my favorite dish. I wonder how the river prawns in this soup taste. Let's tear off its head first, then squeeze out its intestines, and peel off its soft shell. Now, Mr. Mac has removed the lid. Right at this moment, someone suddenly exclaimed. A rich meaty aroma suddenly appeared, and then swept out in all directions like a wave. Everyone who was listening with relish couldn't help but look over. Chapter 1140. Oh my God! It smells so good. Everyone's gaze landed on the big wine jar on the stove at the entrance of the restaurant. The sealed jar had been opened, and the incredible aroma was coming from that jar. New thinking Chinese style hands if the freshwater seafood soup's aroma was tempting, then this aroma was amazing. It came from nothing with just the act of opening the lid. The rich aroma overflowed and almost instantly covered the freshwater seafood soup's aroma. Seafood, meat, mushrooms, and the faint aroma of wine. It was a wonderful combination, but it brought about an incredible aroma that made people fall into it immediately. The onlookers who were mocking earlier all shut their mouths and swallowed their saliva as they looked at the wine jar beside Meg. What's inside? Why is it giving off such a wonderful aroma? How can this be? The bald man opened his mouth wide. Although he didn't want to admit it, the aroma that kept entering his nose had destroyed most of his confidence. Is this Buddha jumps over the wall? The aroma is indeed above the freshwater seafood soup. However, soup is ultimately a competition of taste. Sith slowly clenched his fist and muttered to himself. His gaze was already a little nervous. This aroma. It's too outstanding. Randy forgot to put the peeled river prawns into his mouth. He opened his mouth slightly and unconsciously stretched his neck to look in the direction of the wine jar. This aroma, how is it possible? Candace, who was drinking soup with his head lowered, suddenly raised his head and looked at Meg in disbelief. Robert, Febid, Avis, and the rest also stopped eating and looked in Meg's direction in shock. They were obviously shocked by the aroma. Boss, do you really want to use this small bowl? Isn't it too small? Yarbemia came forward with a stack of small bowls and asked softly. They're not paying. A small bowl is enough, Meg said softly without batting an eyelid. He took the small bowls and started scooping the soup. 6 small bowls of Buddha jumps over the wall were scooped up. There were 4 small pieces of ingredients in each bowl, and each bowl was different. Send it to the judges and Boss Sith. Meg put down the spoon and smiled at everyone. Buddha jumps over the wall. Please try it. Bowls of Buddha jumps over the wall soup were placed in front of the judges, and the last bowl was given to Sith. Meg picked up the bowl of freshwater seafood soup that Sith had passed to him earlier and gestured to him. Then, he scooped up a spoonful and took a sip. The taste was warm and fragrant. The freshness of freshwater seafood was perfectly unleashed, and there was no fishy smell at all. It was indeed a good bowl of soup, better than most chefs. Good soup. Mag gave Sith a thumbs up before putting the bowl aside. He was too full just now, and couldn't finish another bowl of soup. The corner of Sith's mouth twitched. He glanced at the bowl that Meg had put aside. He couldn't tell if Meg's words were sincere praise or just polite words. The bowl of Buddha jumps over the wall was placed in front of the judges. Compared to the big bowl of freshwater seafood soup, the small bowl of Buddha jumps over the wall seemed a little small. It was probably only about 1/5 of the freshwater seafood soup. Although the fragrance of this soup is tempting, isn't this boss too stingy? He actually only gave such a small bowl. A passerby couldn't help but complain. However, most people's gazes were focused on the 5 judges at this moment. Both sides had already presented the soup, and the winner of this battle was in the hands of the judges. This soup. How exactly is it made? Candace looked at the brown soup in the small bowl in front of her with a puzzled expression. There was a transparent shark's fin in the soup, a piece that seemed to be chicken, a piece that seemed to be some kind of fungus, and a piece of meat that she didn't know what it was. She had stayed in Rodu for more than 40 years, and most of the chefs were her friends. She had also tasted countless delicacies, but she had never seen a soup that was so invasive just by its fragrance. Furthermore, this kind of invasiveness didn't make her feel disgusted. Instead, she had the urge to surrender when she came into contact with it and let it face her directly. Of course, this kind of wording wasn't very appropriate, but this was how she felt now. The seemingly messy combination perfectly blended into an irresistible and wonderful fragrance. This was really too unbelievable. Soup had always been seen as a side dish on the dining table. However, if there was a table of dishes in front of her now, even if it was a palace banquet, the fragrance of this soup had already made it the absolute main character. Previously, Meg's arrogant behavior made her have a very bad impression of him, but this soup in front of her made her want to give it a try uncontrollably. As a fair judge, it's my duty to taste. Then, I'll force myself to give it a try. Candace convinced herself in her heart. Then, she picked up the spoon and scooped a spoonful of soup into her mouth. The delicious soup slowly seeped into her taste buds. Then, like a storm, it set off a crazy 30-octave. The freshness of the seafood, the mellowness of the meat, the freshness of the fungus. All kinds of flavors appeared one by one, and played an intoxicating symphony on the tip of the tongue. Oh, what an incredible taste! How did the taste of so many ingredients fuse into such a small mouthful of soup? Not only is it not abrupt at all, but the rich layering is addictive. This is simply a master-level cooking skill. It's amazing. After swallowing the soup, Candace couldn't help but praise. As soon as the words left her mouth, she felt that it was a little inappropriate. However, looking at the wonderful bowl of Buddha jumps over the wall in front of her, she really couldn't say anything against her will. That would be blasphemy to her belief and the career that she had persevered for decades. The surrounding crowd was silent for a while, and all of them were surprised. The culinary queen was bluntly criticized by Meg before. Now, she was praising Meg's Buddha jumps over the wall. Wasn't this too unbelievable? Mr. Mac really never disappoints. Febid looked at the small bowl in front of him. His eyes were glistening with tears as he scooped up a spoonful of soup and put it into his mouth. In his career, he had experienced a Waterloo once. That was during the duel between Meg and Ricky. As an outstanding sharp-tongued critic, he could only complain that his boss was too stingy. That made him have a lot of doubts about his career. Because of that, he had stopped writing for a week. Then, he regrouped and decided to go to Amy's to pick a fight to regain his confidence. From that day onwards, every day was a Waterloo for him. The Waterloo felt good for a while, but it kept on going. Until now, he still could only conclude one thing: Mr. Mac was too stingy. It was really hopeless. The delicious soup swept through his taste buds. The rich layering of the dozens of ingredients was amazing, and the combination of the delicious taste was addictive. It was like wandering in a warm spring, so comfortable that he wanted to sleep. Sure enough. Mr. Mac is still too stingy. Febid opened his eyes and looked at the small bowl with tears streaming down his face. Whispers of the world. Chapter 1141. This must be the pinnacle of soups. An unsurpassable pinnacle, Febid praised as he sipped the soup carefully, afraid that he would spill a little. Mr. Febid, who is known for his sharp tongue, actually gave such an evaluation. That's unbelievable. Everyone was shocked when they heard that. Those who were familiar with Febid's style of food criticism found it even more unbelievable. See that? I told you Mr. Mac would definitely win. I tried that Buddha jumps over the wall with my own mouth last night. That taste. TSK, TSK. It's really memorable, Harrison said proudly to the crazed fan of the freshwater seafood soup beside him. The crazed fan, who had been feeling smug for a while, snorted coldly. He obviously felt guilty, and said, There are still 3 people. It's not certain who will win yet. Seems like Mr. Meg's new dish has made an outstanding innovation again. Robert's eyes lit up too. During this period of time, there had been a phenomenon of people imitating and learning from Mammoth's cooking methods in Chaos City, and developing new dishes and delicacies. Chaos City's culinary world, which had stagnated for many years without any progress and innovation, was entering an era of blossoming flowers. Although there were no stunning and phenomenal delicacies yet, this phenomenon was very good. It was also full of surprises for the diners as they could discover more and more new dishes on the menu. A solo dance that led the trend of delicacies had never happened in the history of Chaos City, or even the history of the Norland continent. Mr. Meg might become a man who would go down in history because of his delicacies. He scooped a spoonful of soup into his mouth, and his eyes became brighter and brighter. The delicious soup was full of meatiness, but it was not greasy at all. The distinct layers were amazing. He wanted to analyze the flavors one by one, but there were simply too many of them. There were even some that he had never seen before. After swallowing the Buddha jumps over the wall, Robert smilingly said, Seems like there will be a change in the next delicious cuisine rankings. Avis also drank a mouthful of soup. The scrumptiousness of the Buddha jumps over the wall bloomed in his mouth. It had a strong impact, and shocked him. The younger generation will surpass us in time. Avis looked at Meg and praised him in his heart. He had also placed Mammoth at the top of the meat rankings. Both the red braised pork and the Peking duck had shocked him greatly. Meg's culinary skills and unique culinary thinking had far surpassed the chefs of this era, including these old fellows who had been immersed in the kitchen for decades. If this soup appeared at the Roth Empire's King's Palace banquet, it would definitely be chosen as the best dish of the banquet. Mr. Meg's understanding and creativity in cooking is truly admirable, Avis praised sincerely as he looked at Meg. You flatter me. Meg cupped his hands and said modestly, President, are you saying that Mr. Mac's Buddha jumps over the wall is going to reach the top? Old Master Avis just said that the freshwater seafood soup has a promising future, but now he's saying that Mr. Mac's Buddha jumps over the wall is the best dish at the palace banquet. Isn't the difference too obvious? Although the final vote hasn't been held yet, it seems like the tables have turned. Ha. Mr. Mac's ability isn't for show. The onlookers discussed fervently. Sith held the small bowl in his hand with a pale face. B-boss, we won't lose, right? The bald man asked softly as he looked at Sith anxiously. He no longer looked as smug and confident as before. It's an unexpectedly high evaluation. What's interesting is that the ingredients in each judge's bowl are different even though it's the same bowl of soup. Then, let's follow the rules just now. I'll try the meat in this soup first and see how it tastes. Randy put the previously peeled river prawns back into the freshwater seafood soup, and scooped out a piece of meat from the bowl with a spoon. Looks like this is a piece of chicken. There's indeed a strong chicken broth taste in the soup. I wonder how this chicken will taste after being cooked for a long time. As Randy spoke, he put the cubed chicken into his mouth. The most important thing about cooking meat was the control of the fire. If it was cooked for too long, the meat would turn dry easily, or it would lose its original chewiness and taste because it was too soft. As an exquisite carnivore, Randy's requirements for meat were almost perverted. In order to find meat that he was satisfied with, he had once carried his backpack and traveled almost all over the Norland continent. This was also the reason why he could become the youngest columnist for Carnivore in just a year. Readers often said that his words had a soul. He was a true carnivore. According to his experience, Meat that had been cooked for such a long time had already lost its taste and texture. He bit into the chicken, and it didn't have the mushy texture that he expected. Instead, it had the perfect amount of tenderness and smoothness. What was even more incredible was the rich meaty taste that came with it. It wasn't just the taste of the chicken. The aroma of wine, seafood, mushrooms, and all kinds of meat had merged together and permeated the chicken perfectly. There was flavor within flavor. It was mushy but not rotten when chewed, and the aftertaste was endless. Randy felt his scalp starting to go numb. This had completely overturned his understanding of meat. He had never seen food like this before. His taste buds were already going crazy as they welcomed this wonderful carnival. He almost chewed his tongue. After swallowing a piece of chicken, he felt like he hadn't had enough. I can't find the words to describe this feeling anymore. Even compared to all the meats that I've tasted in the past, this meat can be ranked in the top 3. What's even more incredible is that I actually encountered it in a bowl of soup. This world is too crazy. Randy was full of admiration. He looked at Meg with a smile and said, "I think I already know what to write for this month's column. Mr. Meg, I really have to thank you." "You're welcome." Meg nodded slightly. He couldn't stand these so-called food critics the most. He hoped that they would also become chefs in their next lives. Randy retracted his gaze and scooped up a piece of transparent shark's fin with the spoon. After studying it for a while, he tried to put it into his mouth. The smooth shark's fin slid into his mouth almost instantly. The shark's fin that was soaked in soup had a very wonderful texture and a wonderful taste. It gave him a completely different experience from the chicken. The 5 judges were all carefully tasting the small bowl of Buddha jumps over the wall. The big bowl of freshwater seafood soup at the side was completely ignored. Ding! Febid's spoon was the first to touch the bottom. He raised his head and poured the last few drops of soup into his mouth. He put down the bowl and looked at Meg. "Mr. Mac, another bowl. Wonderful Bookhouse. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.